Chapter 353. Subsequently, Yiguchin also understood. Every year, the barbarian race would wage war and the 7 major forces would assist the Saint Yuan dynasty to resist the invasion of the barbarian race. There were even people from the 7 major forces stationed at the Great Wall of the Great Wasteland Mansion. The so-called exchange meet was naturally a game between the 7 major forces. In every exchange meet, the top geniuses of the 7 major forces would compete. Those top geniuses were all the leaders of the major forces without exception. The purpose of the exchange meet was to mobilize before the war. The other purpose was that the winner of the exchange meet had the right to allocate the battle zone. What do you mean by allocation of battle zones? Yiguchin was puzzled. There are many barbarian races in the 5 Elements land. Not only the 5 Elements barbarian race, there are also the Thunder race, Wind race, Bone barbarian race, Blood barbarian race and other races. Different battle zones have different barbarian races. For example, the 8,000 miles Flaming Mountain is the base of the Fire race. The Thunder Mountain is the base of the Thunder race. In the previous exchange meet, the winner was Xian Hao from the Limitless Sword sect. He assigned a group of people from the Sword Sect Talon to carry out a mission between the Flaming Mountain and the Thunder Mountain. The Fire race and the Thunder race are known for their violent temperament and extreme methods. Therefore, the Inner Yard suffered a great loss in the last barbarian race war. Many elite disciples died tragically in the hands of the barbarian race. Chu Qingqi's tone was a little gloomy. I see. Yiguchin finally understood. The winner of the exchange meet had the right to assign the battle zones. The Limitless Sword sect and the Sword Sect Talon had a grudge against each other. Xian Hao would naturally assign the Inner Yard disciples to the most dangerous areas so that they could exhaust their strength. The Limitless Sword sect would be assigned to a slightly safer area. This was a tacit rule. After all, it was based on one's true strength. Now, Yiguchin understood why Yan Wushuang had such a personality. In addition to being strong, she was probably under a lot of pressure. After all, in the entire Inner Yard, she was the only one who could be considered a top genius. Bai Zichen was, at most, half a top-notch prodigy. As for the Limitless Sword sect, Yiguchin concluded that other than Xian Hao, there were definitely other geniuses. Even if they were slightly weaker than Xian Hao, they wouldn't be too much weaker. As for the Saber-Sealing Monarch Palace, other than demonic Saber Ling Ju, they also had a prime sovereign. Their strength was immeasurable. Looks like this exchange is also a silent battlefield. Yiguchin shook his head. Indeed. That's why the sect doesn't want the news of you being alive to be leaked. They want to use you as a trump card, Chu Qingqi analyzed. I don't mind, Yiguchin said calmly. As a disciple of the Sword Sect's Pagoda Forest, he still had to fulfill his duty. However, he was also interested in the other top geniuses of the 7 forces. At the same time, Yiguchin was also very curious. How would Xian Hao feel when he saw him alive and well again? The banquet lasted for an entire night before it ended. After the banquet ended, Mu Xingzu asked faintly, Senior Brother Yi, can you accompany Xingzhu to a place? Yiguchin nodded slightly. They arrived at a bamboo forest. It was also in this bamboo forest that Yiguchin began to teach Mu Xingzu for the first time. Mu Xingzu raised her head and watched the bamboo leaves fall faintly. A trace of nostalgia and sadness appeared on her pure and beautiful face. After a long silence, Mu Xingzu mustered up her courage and asked, if Xingzhu leaves, will Senior Brother Yi miss me? Yiguchin was taken aback. His expression remained silent. Just as Mu Xingzu revealed a slightly bitter smile, Yiguchin said indifferently. Yes. Mu Xingzu's expression froze. Soon after, an extremely dazzling smile bloomed on her face. Xingzhu will also miss Senior Brother Yi. Mu Xingzu shouted shyly. Then, she turned around and ran away. Faint tears flowed from the corners of her eyes. However, Yiguchin sighed softly. It's good that she leaves. A lonely star, a lonely star. It's not necessarily a good thing for her to stay by my side. Yi Guqin's eyes were deep as he sighed inwardly. He thought of Situ Hongxue and Su Jianshi. It seemed that the women who stayed by his side would experience tragedy. Perhaps this was the meaning of this name. A lonely star, destined to be lonely. However, in the next moment, Yi Guqin sighed softly and smiled. He was a sword master, a sword devil. His life was a sword. Why should he care about feelings and sorrows? Let's start cultivating. After the Sword Sect Pagoda, it's about time to explore the 5 elements land. Yi Guqin thought about his next arrangements. However, just as the entire Sword Sect Pagoda fell into a short period of peace, a change occurred far away at the Great Wall of the Great Desolate Mansion. Thunder Fire Valley was located at the periphery of the 5 elements land. It was the intersection of the Thunder Mountain Range and the 8,000-mile Flaming Mountain Range. At this moment, a few young disciples with long swords on their backs were stationed at the periphery of Thunderfire Valley. They were bored to death. When can we return to the Great Wall of the Desolate Border? We've been stationed here for almost half a month. A young man complained. Everyone, keep your spirits up. During this period of time, those guys from the Fire Tribe and the Thunder Tribe are not peaceful. It seems like a war is about to break out. I hope we can survive until the change of guard. Another tall and thin young man sighed. They were all disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda and had been stationed at the Great Wall of the Desolate Border for a long time. The Great Wall of the Desolate Border was jointly guarded by the 7 Great Powers and the Saint Origin dynasty to prevent the barbarian tribe from invading. The 7 Great Powers were assigned to different battlefields. Thunderfire Valley was the place where the disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda were stationed. Recently, many of our senior and junior brothers have died. A pretty girl said with red eyes. Just bear with it. The tall and thin young man sighed. However, at this moment, there seemed to be a change in the valley not far away. A tiger's roar reverberated in all directions. What's going on? All the disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda were on high alert. Just at this moment, a flaming arrow shot towards the group of Sword Sect Pagoda Forest's disciples. That kind of terrifying power could instantly pierce through the true chi defense of a 5th transformation Divine Soul Realm expert. Puchi. Under the rain of flaming arrows, many disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda were directly penetrated and fell to the ground dead. Enemy attack, retreat. The tall and thin young man roared. At this moment, a shadow covered his body. It was a giant red tiger. On top of the giant tiger sat a tall and strong man. The man's skin was dark yellow and there was a ferocious tiger totem on his chest. It carried the aura of a fire totem. His eyes seemed to be spewing flames as he held a giant axe in his hand. Retreat, it's the Fire Tribe's holy son, Yan Shao. The tall and thin young man's expression changed drastically. They had been stationed here for a long time and naturally knew some of the famous people of the Fire Tribe. The man riding the giant red tiger was one of the Fire Tribe's holy sons, Yan Shao. The tiger totem on his chest was also one of the Fire Tribe's supreme totems, the heavenly demonic flaming tiger. Ha, Sword Sect Pagoda, just a bunch of trash. Except for Yan Wushuang, none of you can fight. You will all become the fire demon tiger's food. Yan Shao revealed a cruel and cold smile. He swung his axe with the power of the totem and directly split the tall and thin young man in front of him in half. Blood flowed out. Not far away, the delicate girl's mind buzzed and she was a little dazed. Roar! Yan Zhao's mount, the fire demon demonic tiger, swallowed the young man's corpse in one gulp. TSK, such a cute girl. Yan Zhao's eyes revealed a cruel look as he walked towards the frightened girl. At this moment, a flaming ray directly pierced the girl's forehead. Not far away, on the other side, a woman with a voluptuous figure in a beast-skin skirt was looking at her fingers. She was the one who shot out the flaming ray. Huamei, what are you doing? Yan Shao showed a displeased look. Nothing. But if you delay Brother Yan Xuanji's mission, you can't bear the responsibility, the woman called Huamei said. Yan Xuanji. Hearing this name, even the holy son, Yan Shao, showed a wary look. It was because Yan Xuanji was a peerless genius with the wind and fire dual totems. He was known as the Double Crown King. Brother Yan Xuanji, you should know that if you offend him, even if you are a holy son, you won't have a good ending, Huamei sneered. Humph, isn't it just dual totems? Although Yan Shao said so, there was a wary look in his eyes. TSK, are you jealous of Brother Yan Xuanji's talent? With 2 supreme totems, he can be called the Double Crown King. With 3 totems, he can be called the Triple Crown King. Back then, there was also a peerless king with 5 totems. Moreover, all 5 totems were primogenitor level totems, Huamei said with a respectful look. Are you talking about that king? Didn't he go missing a long time ago? I heard that 5-element temple sent down an oracle because they predicted that the sacred 5-crown king would appear in this war. When he said this, even Yan Shao could not help but exclaim in surprise. The 5-crown king was a legend of the 5 elements barbarian tribe and was respected by everyone. However, after that, there hadn't been a 5-crown king in the barbarian tribe for a long time. Even the existence of the barbarian race that the holy sons and holy daughters feared could only be called the king of the 4 crowns. The 5-crown king had become a legend in the barbarian tribe. Will the 5-crown king really appear? Huamei was a little absent-minded. With 5 great totems on his body, he could communicate with the 5 elements. Even a saintess like Huamei could only revere such a peerless character. If the 5-crown king really appeared, it would be a sign of the rise of the 5 elements barbarian tribe. Chapter 354. Yan Shao, Huamei, and the others had broken through the lightning fire valley. In the other regions of the 5 elements ground, it was as if they had planned this beforehand. They launched an attack on the 7 major forces at the same time. In the 9 profound sects encampment, a group of barbarians launched a surprise attack. Among them, there was a figure that was wrapped in lightning. Someone recognized him and screamed in fear. He was the sacred son of the lightning clan, Lei Jiuming. On the other side, in the Consonance Palace's encampment, a woman with a green snake tattoo on her face looked at the terrified disciples of the Consonance Palace with indifference. She waved her hand casually and blue waves surged out, drowning the group of female disciples of the Consonance Palace. She was the newly risen sacred daughter of the Water Clan, Kueishue Yinji. In the Limitless Sword sect's encampment, the barbarians launched an attack as well. A young figure wearing golden armor and holding a golden spear appeared. His aura soared into the sky and he was insufferably arrogant. The golden spear in his hand pierced through 3 or 4 elite disciples of the Limitless Sword sect's Sun Moon Hall. He laughed and said, "Where are the geniuses of the Limitless Sword sect? Where is Xian Hao? I am the sacred son of the Gold Clan, Jin Zhanglie. I am waiting for him to fight." As the encampment of the 7 major forces was attacked at the same time, the entire desolate land was in chaos. The barbarian race had officially launched an attack on the Great Wall of the desolate land. The scale of the barbarian race's attack was unprecedented. However, the 7 major forces in the other regions of the Saint Origin dynasty did not notice this change immediately. In the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, the originally peaceful atmosphere became heated again with the opening of the Sword Sect Pagoda. As one of the 3 great places of opportunity in the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, the opening of the Sword Sect Pagoda naturally attracted everyone's attention. Unfortunately, the Sword Sect Pagoda was only open to the inner sect disciples. Therefore, the outer sect disciples were not fated to enter the Sword Sect Pagoda. However, this also stimulated their desire to enter the inner sect. On the number 5 peak, Yiguchen was practicing his sword in the bamboo forest. As Mu Xingzu left and the divine eagle turned into an egg, the entire number 5 peak became somewhat quiet. However, Yiguchen was already used to this feeling and did not feel lonely. He wielded the Xianming heavy sword, and his sword aura was as heavy as a mountain. With one strike, the entire bamboo forest seemed to tremble. Bamboo leaves filled the sky and fell down like rain. With this Xianming heavy sword, I can begin to comprehend the edgeless sword intent once more. The edgeless sword will is ingenious. It is not swift and fierce, but it has the power of 1,000 caddies. It can even be amplified by the void sword technique and the great void sword wave. It can ignore the enemy's defense and attack the body directly. Yi Guqin was trying to figure it out. Of course, edgeless sword intent was a peerless sword intent after all. It was not something that could be cultivated in a short period of time, so Yi Guqin was not in a hurry. In addition, Yi Guqin was also in the process of comprehending the fire sword essence. As for condensing the 5 elements sword intent, Yi Guqin already had a plan. However, he had to wait until the 5 color totems were all awakened before he could begin to consider it. As long as he could awaken the totem, it would be much easier to comprehend the 5 elements sword intent. This also gave Yi Guqin another goal to go to the land of 5 elements. Just as Yi Guqin was thinking in his heart, a beautiful figure flew over from afar. She had a ponytail and a beautiful face. It was Ji Ling. The sword sect pagoda is about to open. Don't forget about the battle with Shuang. Ji Ling put her hands behind her back and leaned forward slightly, smiling at Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin nodded lightly. Seeing this, Ji Ling wrinkled her nose slightly and said, "It seems that you are not worried about this battle at all? Just a defeated opponent." Yi Guqin put away the Xianming heavy sword. Hey, how dare you say that about my Shuang? After she lost the battle with you, she has been cultivating hard these days. She is even crazier than before. Ji Ling said, her eyes seemed to be filled with pity. It has nothing to do with me. Yi Guqin's eyes were indifferent. TSK. Shuang is so beautiful. Aren't you being too unkind to her? Ji Ling twirled her hair with her fingers. She doesn't need others to pity her. Yi Guqin shook his head slightly and said, "Senior sister Ji Ling, let's go to the sword sect pagoda." Ji Ling sighed and nodded slightly. The sword sect pagoda stood on the peak of the mountain. Although the pagoda was not particularly tall, it was simple and grand as if it had existed since ancient times. At this moment, a group of people had already gathered outside the sword sect pagoda. They were all elite disciples of the inner court. There was also Qing He, Gu Tuo, and other elders here to preside over the situation. In the crowd, Bai Zichen stood alone in a corner. In the past, he was so extraordinary in the inner court. No matter where he went, there would be people looking up to and following him. But now, Bai Zichen stood alone and seemed to be slightly lonely. Many gazes in the surroundings swept past Bai Zichen from time to time, and all of them carried ridicule. Even though they didn't dare to openly ridicule or offend Bai Zichen due to his cultivation, the shameless things Bai Zichen had done had already caused many inner court disciples to feel slight disgust. As for Wang Xiaotian, Li Lingxiao, and the others, they'd drawn a clear line between themselves and Bai Zichen since a long time ago. Senior sister Yan and senior brother Yi are about to arrive, right? Yeah, I'm really looking forward to senior brother Ye's performance. Senior sister Yan and the others had a record of ascending to the 6th level of the sword sect pagoda. I wonder if senior brother Yi will be able to break this record. Senior brother Yi caused a myriad of swords to resound in the forest of 1,000 swords and was able to leave behind a sword mark on solitary sword cliff. I'm guessing that his performance in the sword sect pagoda will definitely shock us. Numerous disciples were excitedly discussing the matter between Yan Wushuang and Yi Guqin. They were very curious about exactly how many levels Yi Guqin would be able to ascend to if he challenged the sword sect pagoda. Exactly what would the outcome of the battle between him and Yan Wushuang be? As for Bai Zichen, who stood at the side, he clenched his fists tightly when he heard the discussions of the inner court disciples. As long as my performance in the sword sect pagoda this time can surpass Yi Guqin, then I still have hope to once again stand at my previous position and be looked up to by others. Bai Zichen's expression was restrained, but he was roaring in his heart. Bai Zichen felt that as long as his performance was sufficiently dazzling this time, he would be able to return to his previous position. Right at this moment, a beautiful figure arrived from afar. She wore an ice silk skirt armor, and her appearance was peerlessly beautiful. A pair of slender, round, and beautiful legs swayed with her footsteps, moving the heart. Even if Yan Wushuang was defeated by Yi Guqin earlier, it still didn't reduce her popularity. There were even inner court disciples that praised Yan Wushuang for being neither arrogant nor discouraged, as expected of the daughter of the sect master. But at this moment, Yan Wushuang's beautiful face was expressionless. She looked around as if she was looking for Yi Guqin's figure. When her gaze swept past Bai Zichen, Yan Wushuang's gaze didn't stop at all, as if she was looking at an ordinary person. This caused Bai Zichen's heart to feel as if it was dripping blood. At this moment, two figures finally arrived in the distance. It was Yi Guqin and Ji Ling. Yan Wushuang's gaze collided with Yi Guqin's at the first possible moment. The reason why she disregarded her face and wanted to compete with Yi Guqin again was because she was unwilling to give up just like that. Seeing that the two of them were about to clash again, everyone present looked at Yan Wushuang and Yi Guqin with anticipation in their eyes. Chapter 355. Yi Guqin directly ignored Yan Wushuang's gaze and didn't react at all. Although he had promised Yan Wushuang to compete again, it was just a casual request. He wanted to challenge the Sword Sect Pagoda. Even Yan Wushuang felt a trace of embarrassment when she saw Yi Guqin's indifferent expression that seemed to be disregarding her. Many of the surrounding disciples sighed in amazement. In the Sword Sect Pagoda forest, only Yi Guqin dared to ignore Yan Wushuang like this. If it was anyone else, they would be overjoyed to receive such attention from Yan Wushuang. Although Yi Guqin's reaction was cold, Yan Wushuang still gritted her teeth and said, "Yi Guqin, let's compete this time and see who can reach the highest level of the Sword Sect Pagoda." Yi Guqin nodded indifferently. "Yi Guqin, let me tell you, this Sword Sect Pagoda isn't so easy to pass. Don't fail miserably later." Ji Ling reminded kindly. Ji Ling had passed the Sword Sect Pagoda before, so he naturally knew that it wasn't so easy to pass. Even the elites of the inner court like them could only pass the 6th level of the Sword Sect Pagoda's 9 levels. Only the elders had passed the 7th level. As for the 8th level, only Feng Manlu, Yan Changge, and Qiu Shan had entered. The 9th level was like a taboo that no one had entered. Therefore, Ji Ling's warning wasn't without reason. Yi Guqin naturally wouldn't underestimate the Sword Sect Pagoda. "Alright, almost everyone in the inner court has arrived. Let's begin. Enter one by one. The higher you reach the highest level and the longer you persist, the greater your gains will be." Elder Qing, he said in a clear voice. The eyes of many inner court disciples revealed excitement. When Yi Guqin had just entered the Sword Sect Pagoda forest, he'd once found out from Chu Qingqi that the density of spirit energy within the Sword Sect Pagoda would double with every level passed, and it was extremely beneficial to one's cultivation. After that, the Sword Sect Pagoda officially opened. Yi Guqin stood indifferently. He didn't choose to be the first to enter, but wanted to observe for a while. Seeing that Yi Guqin didn't move, Yan Wushuang naturally didn't intend to enter for the time being. After that, the disciples entered the Sword Sect Pagoda one by one. After entering the Sword Sect Pagoda, if one broke through a level, that level of the pagoda would emit light. This way, they would be able to directly display how many levels a disciple could reach. However, as the disciples entered one after another, the one with the best performance was only able to reach the 4th level. Moreover, they didn't persist for too long. Looks like this Sword Sect Pagoda isn't so simple. Yi Guqin muttered to himself. Time passed. 2 days had passed, and the best result for the inner campus disciples was the 5th level. At this moment, only the top 10 plus disciples hadn't challenged the Sword Sect Pagoda. "I'll go next." Yi Xia stepped forward and took 2 bites of the drumstick. After the Void Sword Realm, his strength had also increased a lot. He now had the cultivation of the Divine Soul's 6th transformation. Yi Xia entered the tower, and soon, the first floor lit up. Then, the second layer also lit up, and the third layer lit up slightly later. The fourth level was even slower. In the end, he stayed at the fifth level for a long time before he finally broke through. Light lit up, but he was soon teleported out. This proved that Yi Xia had only broken through the fifth level and hadn't broken through the sixth for the time being. Unlucky. Yi Xia curled his lips as if he wasn't satisfied with his result. Be content. Only senior sister Yan and the others have the ability to reach the sixth level, Chu Qingqi said. After that, Wang Xiaotian, Li Lingxiao, and the others also began to challenge the pagoda. Their results were slightly better as they reached the sixth level. This was also the result that the top 10 disciples of the inner campus could generally achieve. As for the seventh level, only the elders had the ability to reach it. Huff. Yan Wushuang deeply exhaled. She did not delay any longer. She turned her head and glanced at Yi Guqin. Her beautiful eyes flickered with determination. After which, her body flashed and she directly entered the sword sect tower. Senior sister Yan has entered. Which level will she reach? At least the sixth level is certain. It's even possible for her to reach the seventh level. That might not necessarily be the case. The higher you go in the sword sect pagoda, the more difficult it is. The seventh level is absolutely much more difficult than the sixth level. Otherwise, it wouldn't be only the elders that were able to pass through it. When they saw Yan Wushuang enter the pagoda, the spirits of all the disciples were raised. All of them wanted to know if Yan Wushuang who'd lost to Yi Guqin would be able to turn the tables. Ji Ling and the others stared fixedly at the movement outside the pagoda as well. Yi Guqin was extremely casual. In next to no time, the second level of the pagoda lit up. It wasn't long before the third level lit up. After that, the fourth level, the fifth level. Yan Wushuang's speed far surpassed ordinary disciples. Even Wang Xiaotian, Li Lingxiao, and the others couldn't compare to her. In the end, the light outside the pagoda was stuck at the sixth level. This was already the best result of the inner court disciples, and it was also the record of Yan Wushuang and the others. As for the seventh level, only the elders had passed through it. Time slowly flowed by, and the light was still stuck at the sixth level. Shuang, good luck. Ji Ling broke out in a cold sweat for Yan Wushuang. Finally, after an entire day, the seventh level lit up. She passed. Senior sister Yan passed the seventh level. At this moment, all the disciples outside the sword sect pagoda were shocked. Yan Wushuang was the first person to pass the seventh level apart from the inner court elders, Feng Manlu, and the other two experts. This was also enough to prove her strength and talent. Not long after, Yan Wushuang was teleported out. Her aura was weak, and at the same time, her face was a little pale. Clearly, she had exhausted a lot of energy. Even so, a faint smile finally appeared on her beautiful face that had always been indifferent. To be able to make Yan Wushuang smile, it was clear that she was in a good mood at the moment. Her beautiful eyes looked at Yi Guqin, and the light of confidence surged once again. It was as if the pride and stubbornness that had been crushed by Yi Guqin had all returned. Yi Guqin, it's your turn, Yan Wushuang said. Wushuang, let me do it. At this moment, Bai Zichen who had been standing at the side all this while stood out and decided to enter. Who allowed you to call me that? Yan Wushuang's beautiful eyes revealed a trace of coldness. Her impression of Bai Zichen was already terrible to the extreme. Bai Zichen's expression changed slightly when he saw this, and he felt a little unnatural. However, in the next moment, Bai Zichen still gritted his teeth and entered the sword sect pagoda. He wanted to announce to everyone that no matter what, he was still a genius and not someone who could be casually criticized. Seeing Bai Zichen enter the pagoda, everyone looked over. Although Bai Zichen's reputation had fallen to the bottom of the inner court, he was still the strongest person apart from Yi Guqin and Yan Wushuang. Therefore, he attracted some attention. Although Bai Zichen has done something wrong, he's still a genius after all. He can adjust his mentality, Gu Tuo said indifferently. Qing He glanced at him from the side and did not say anything. Although Gu Tuo had lost face because of Bai Zichen was still a genius of the Grand Elders faction. After that, the sword sect pagoda lit up one after another and finally stopped at the 6th level. Could it be that Bai Zichen can also break through to the 7th level? I think it'll be difficult. Some inner court disciples whispered to each other. While everyone was discussing, the 7th level of the sword sect pagoda suddenly lit up. Bai Zichen really passed the 7th level. The surrounding disciples were in an uproar. Although they were not very interested in Bai Zichen now, his cultivation foundation was indeed something they could not compare to. Not long after, Bai Zichen's figure flashed out. Although he looked even weaker than Yan Wushuang, who had just come out and had exhausted a lot of energy, a faint smile appeared on his face again, and his back unknowingly straightened a little. Even Yan Wushuang was a little surprised and glanced at Bai Zichen. Of course, that was all. She only felt a little surprised. Yi Guchen, you're the last one, Bai Zichen said. He enjoyed looking at the shocked gazes around him. Moreover, he also knew how difficult it was to pass the 6th and 7th levels of the Sword Sect Pagoda. This Sword Sect Pagoda is different from the previous levels. You might be strong, but passing the pagoda is not something you can succeed with just strength. Bai Zichen narrowed his eyes slightly. Both he and Yan Wushuang had passed the Sword Sect Pagoda many times. On the other hand, it was Yi Guchen's first time passing the pagoda. This was a natural disadvantage in itself. Yi Guchen did not react when he saw the playful look in Bai Zichen's eyes. His feet flashed and he directly entered the Sword Sect Pagoda. As Yi Guchen entered, numerous gazes and even a few elders cast over with extreme attention. Among the 3 great opportunities, Yi Guchen had created miracles in the 1,000-sword forest and single sword cliff. Would he be able to create another miracle in the Sword Sect Pagoda? Everyone was looking forward to it. Chapter 356. The Sword Sect Pagoda had existed since ancient times. No one knew when or who had built it. However, it was also because of this that the Sword Sect Pagoda was mysterious and simple. As soon as Yi Guchen stepped into the Sword Sect Pagoda, he felt an extremely pure and rich spiritual energy. This kind of spiritual energy actually caused the circulation of the true energy in his body to increase by quite a bit. This place is indeed mysterious. It is extremely beneficial for cultivation. Yi Guchen's eyes lit up. Staying here for 2 hours was equivalent to several days of hard cultivation outside. It was indeed the most famous cultivation treasure land in the Sword Sect Pagoda forest. At the same time, Yi Guchen could also faintly feel a kind of pressure. However, this was only the first level, so the pressure was only faint and did not affect him much. However, what surprised Yi Guchen was that as soon as he stepped into the Sword Sect Pagoda, the golden sword-shaped insignia on the back of his hands suddenly emitted a golden light. This made Yi Guchen slightly surprised. This sword-shaped insignia was the symbol of the 9th generation of the Sword Sect. It was originally green, but after leaving a mark on the cliff, the green sword-shaped insignia turned golden. Yi Guchen knew that the golden sword-shaped insignia represented the elite sequence. Fortunately, the Sword Sect Pagoda was a 1-by-1 challenge. There was no one else here except for Yi Guchen. Otherwise, Yi Guchen would really be in a bit of trouble. Rumble. At this moment, there was a sudden vibration all around. Yi Guchen looked around. He saw that there were 10 puppets surrounding him. These puppets were iron gray in color and had a hard texture. Yi Guchen did not use the Xianming heavy sword. Instead, he raised his hand and held it in the air. Surging golden true energy gushed out and condensed into a golden longsword. Boom! The 10 puppets took a step forward and rushed toward Yi Guchen like cannonballs. Yi Guchen also made a move. The power of his perfect body circulated, and a terrifying force that was comparable to that of a dragon and elephant surged in his body. He swung his sword horizontally, cutting through the air and emitting an ear-piercing whistling sound. Clang! Yi Guchen sent one of the puppets flying, leaving a faint mark on its surface. Their strength is comparable to the fourth transformation of the Divine Soul realm, but their bodies are abnormally hard. Yiguchin was able to estimate the combat strength of these puppets with a single strike. But with his current cultivation, dealing with a Divine Soul fourth transformation puppet still did not have any pressure. Boom! 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 Yiguchin's sword was sometimes as swift as fire and sometimes as steady as a mountain. He used these puppets to hone his swordsmanship. Soon, the 10 puppets were defeated, and the passageway to the second level appeared. Yiguchin stepped inside. Outside the Sword Sect Pagoda, everyone started discussing when they saw the first level light up. Looks like Sword Sect Yi has already passed the first level and is beginning to enter the second level. That's right, but why do I feel that it's not as fast as I imagined? Isn't the first level's test just a puppet with a third transformation Divine Soul? Who knows? Maybe it's Sword Sect Ye's first time entering the Sword Sect Pagoda, so he's not used to it. Many inner court disciples were whispering to each other, but the time Yiguchin spent on the first level had indeed exceeded their expectations. Although the time Yiguchin spent couldn't be considered long, compared to Yiguchin's current status and reputation, it didn't seem to match. Yiguchin, it's your first time entering the Sword Sect Pagoda, so you're not used to it. From this point of view, it's me who has the advantage. But in the end, let the results speak for themselves, Yan Wushuang muttered in her heart. Just as everyone was guessing, Yiguchin had already reached the second level. Compared to the first level, the pressure on the second level had actually doubled. As the pressure increased, Yiguchin discovered that his strength was faintly suppressed. The second level's test was also a puppet. But the number of puppets became 20. Furthermore, through the preliminary exchange, Yiguchin roughly guessed the strength of these puppets. They were all comparable to Divine Soul 7th transformation experts. 20 puppets comparable to Divine Soul 7th transformation were not so easy to deal with. But Yiguchin's strength far surpassed people of the same rank. It was not even weak compared to Divine Soul 9th transformation experts. Therefore, this second level still did not pose a great threat to Yiguchin. It just needed to spend a little bit of time. And at the periphery of the Sword Sect Pagoda, everyone's gazes became doubtful once more. The time senior apprentice Brother Yi spent on the second level was actually so long too. Isn't the second level only 5 Divine Soul 4th transformation puppets? With senior apprentice Brother Ye's strength, he should be able to pass through very quickly. Many people were puzzled. They had personally witnessed Yiguchin's strength in the ranking battle previously. It was not weaker than Yan Wushuang. And Yan Wushuang only took a short moment to pass through the second level. Heh. Looks like Yiguchin encountered some trouble in this Sword Sect Pagoda, Bai Zichin said casually. His face finally revealed a trace of a relaxed expression. Everyone did not pay attention to it, but they also felt a trace of disappointment in their hearts. Perhaps it was because Yiguchin had shocked them too much, so now that Yiguchin did not create another miracle, this feeling of the gap was a little big. Yiguchin, according to your strength, you shouldn't only have such a performance. Are you hiding your strength and waiting for later to erupt? Yan Wushuang frowned slightly. She also sensed that something was wrong. Inside the Sword Sect Pagoda, figures intersected and soared light soared into the sky. Accompanied by a series of rumbles, these 20 Divine Soul 7th transformation puppets were all beaten to the ground. Yiguchin panted slightly. Looks like this Sword Sect Pagoda is indeed not easy to pass, Yiguchin thought to himself. However, Yiguchin had never passed through it before, so he did not know that the Sword Sect Pagoda that he had passed through was already qualitatively different from the Sword Sect Pagoda that others had passed through. The third level. Yiguchin did not rest too much and directly entered the entrance of the third level. After entering the third level, the pressure doubled again. Yiguchin could faintly feel that the circulation of the true energy in his body seemed to be a little sluggish. And the third level was also filled with puppets. However, there were a total of 40 puppets. Each puppet had a strength comparable to an 8th transformation Divine Soul 7th transformation Divine Soul 7th transformation. Even with Yiguchin's strength, he did not dare to let his guard down at this level. After all, his cultivation had been suppressed by the pressure and had been weakened a lot. In addition to the 48th transformation Divine Soul, 8th transformation Divine Soul, 7th transformation Divine Soul, 7th transformation Divine Soul, 7th transformation Divine Soul, 7th transformation, even Yiguchen would not be too relaxed. He directly unleashed his half-transformed flawless body and rushed into the group of puppets. Outside the Sword Sect Pagoda, the discussion never stopped. Sword Sect Yi has entered the 3rd level. Starting from the 3rd level, the pressure will appear. Although it's very weak, it still has a certain impact. In addition, there are also 10 puppets of the 6th transformation Divine Soul 7th transformation. It's no longer something that ordinary disciples can pass through. But for senior brother Yi, this shouldn't be too difficult. Even now, Chu Qingqi, Yi Xia, and the others had faces full of doubt. They did not know why Yiguchen's speed was so slow. And on the 3rd level, Yiguchen used a full hour to completely defeat the 40 puppets of the 8th transformation Divine Soul 7th transformation and enter the 4th level. In the eyes of the disciples outside, this speed was already considered relatively slow. This caused some people to reveal looks of disappointment. Chapter 357. Now, in the hearts of the disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, it could be said that Yiguchen was a leader and a role model. Even Yan Wushuang's reputation in the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest was faintly surpassed by Yiguchen. However, it was also because of this that everyone still had high expectations for Yiguchen. In the 1,000 Sword Forest and 1 Sword Cliff, Yiguchen had created miracles that ordinary people could not do. Therefore, everyone naturally thought that Yiguchen would definitely have a shocking performance in the Sword Sect Pagoda. However, now it seemed that although Yiguchen's performance could not be said to be bad, it was definitely not amazing. The 3rd level, 1 hour. If it was an ordinary inner yard disciple, it might be a good result, but for Yiguchen, it's a little mediocre, Gu Tuo said in a neutral tone. Elder Qing he did not reply. He only frowned and was puzzled. In the Sword Sect Pagoda, Yiguchen had reached the 4th level. At the 4th level, the pressure was even more terrifying. It almost suppressed 20% of Yiguchen's true qi. Not only that, but the pressure also contained a soul pressure that could restrict soul power. Fortunately, Yiguchen had a spiritual item like the meteorite demonic soul butterfly in his sea of consciousness. Therefore, the soul pressure did not affect Yiguchen too much. On the 4th level, there were finally no puppets. However, in front of Yiguchen, a young man holding a sword appeared. The young man was naturally not a real person, but an illusion constructed by the Sword Sect Pagoda. Although it was an illusion, it was no different from a real person. Defeat me and you can pass the 4th level. After the young man with the sword finished speaking, he did not waste any time and directly attacked. With this attack, Yiguchen could feel that the young man's strength was comparable to the 9 transformations of the Divine Soul. Not only that, the young man also had the wisdom of a human and could perform sword skills. Therefore, the young man's strength was far from those puppets that only knew how to attack with their physical bodies. Even Yiguchen did not hold back and began to use his sword techniques to attack. Outside the Sword Sect Pagoda, some disciples shook their heads as they looked at the 4th level that hadn't lit up for a long time. I remember that the 4th level's test seems to be a phantom of the Divine Soul 7th transformation. However, he knows some sword techniques and his strength is not bad. But why did senior brother Yi waste so much time? Some disciples were puzzled. Yiguchen, you didn't really fail at such an easy task, did you? Ji Ling was puzzled as well. Yan Wushuang also sensed that something was wrong, but she couldn't figure out why Yiguchen's speed was so slow. On the other hand, Bai Zichen had a faint smile on his face. If Yiguchen continued like this, it was unknown whether he could even pass the 6th floor, let alone the 7th floor. If that was the case, Yiguchen's reputation would undoubtedly drop. 2 hours later, Yiguchen also defeated the young man's shadow. The 4th level of the Sword Sect Pagoda lit up and Yiguchen entered the 5th level. In fact, if Yiguchen was willing to take out the Xianming heavy sword, even if it was a phantom of the Divine Soul ninth transformation, he could quickly end the battle. However, cultivating in the sword sect pagoda had extraordinary benefits. Secondly, the youth with the sword was quite agile. It was a good training for Yiguchen's swordsmanship, so he was not in a hurry to defeat him. After reaching the 5th level, Yiguchen realized that the strong pressure had left Yiguchen with only 20% of his genuine chi and soul power. The opponents on the 5th level were two phantoms of the Divine Soul 9th transformation experts. However, when they drew their swords, Yiguchen's face changed slightly. This was because the power of their sword moves had reached the level of a king-level sword principle. Two phantoms of the Divine Soul 9th transformation and could perform king-level sword techniques. As for Yiguchen, he was suppressed and could only use 20% of his genuine chi and soul power. This was definitely an unfair battle. Now, it's time to give it my all. Yiguchen did not hesitate and directly took out the Xianming heavy sword. However, when the Xianming heavy sword was in his hand, Yiguchen's genuine chi and soul power were suppressed again. This was because the Xianming heavy sword had such a characteristic. It could suppress genuine chi and soul power, in addition to its terrifying weight. If it were someone else, they would not even have the ability to use it. However, Yiguchen had the dragon elephant power, the ultimate sea of chi and the sea of consciousness that was far beyond an ordinary person. Hence, he still had the power to fight. Boom! In Yiguchen's body, the 360 golden sword veins that had not been used for a long time appeared again. In an instant, Yiguchen's aura soared. Although the Xianming heavy sword was not sharpened, it carried a terrifying sword chi. Boom! When Yiguchen drew his sword, the entire sword sect pagoda seemed to tremble for a moment. A terrifying shockwave spread out. The two shadows of the 9 changes of the godly soul also attacked at the same time. The power of the king-level sword arts was released. The time Yiguchen spent on the 5th level was even longer. He lasted for a total of 8 hours. The people outside the sword sect pagoda were a little anxious. The test on the 5th level should only be a shadow of the 8 changes of the godly soul realm. Moreover, it can display a superior spiritual sword art. At the same time, the pressure should be able to suppress about 30% of one's strength. With senior brother Ye's strength, it should not be a problem. Many people were puzzled, especially the inner yard elites who had passed the 5th level. Because they had experienced it personally, they knew how difficult it was to pass the 5th level. It might not be easy for them, but in their minds, Yiguchen should have no problem passing the 5th level. 8 hours later, the 5th floor lit up, and everyone breathed a sigh of relief. This meant that Yiguchen had entered the 6th level. The 6th level was also the best result for most of the inner yard elites, including Wang Xiaotian, Li Lingxiao, and the others. As for the 7th level, apart from the elders and above, only Yan Wushuang and Bai Zichen had passed it. I wonder if senior brother Yi can pass the 6th level. With senior brother Ye's speed, I think it's a little difficult. In the beginning, the people in the inner yard had high hopes for Yiguchen. Not to mention the 6th level, some people guessed that Yiguchen might pass the 7th level. But now, it seemed that no one was sure if Yiguchen could pass the 6th level. Yiguchen, you're still a human after all, not a god. It's impossible for you to keep creating miracles, Bai Zichen thought to himself. He thought that with Yiguchen's current performance, it would be good enough if he could pass the 6th level at most. In this way, the best results this time would be him and Yan Wushuang. Yan Wushuang was also staring at the sword sect pagoda. She didn't really believe that the youth who defeated her with the pathos of heaven would dim here. The test of the 6th level is 3 phantoms of the Divine Soul 9 transformations with king-level sword skills. Yiguchen, how much time are you going to spend this time? Yan Wushuang raised her head and looked at the 6th level of the sword sect pagoda, revealing her perfectly curved chin and jade-like neck. On the 6th level, Yiguchen was drenched in sweat and panted as he looked at the 5 phantoms of the Divine Soul 9 transformations before him. Not only that, But most importantly, these 5 phantoms of the divine soul 9 transformations all possessed a type of sword intent. Moreover, when the sword intents fused with each other, it actually seemed to form a sword formation. This is the sword will of the 5 elements? Yi Guqin was also a little shocked. Why was the test so difficult from the 6th level onwards? How did Yan Wushuang and the others pass so quickly? Now, even Yi Guqin started to suspect that the sword sect pagoda was giving him special treatment. Chapter 358. Yi Guqin had also observed from outside the sword sect pagoda before. Other than those ordinary disciples, Yan Wushuang, Bai Zichen, and the others were all very fast. Therefore, Yi Guqin already had a little confidence at that time. However, after entering the sword sect pagoda, Yi Guqin realized that the difficulty of the pagoda was not small. At the same time, he was a little puzzled as to why Yan Wushuang and the others were so fast. Could it be because... Yi Guqin's gaze suddenly fell on the golden sword-shaped emblem on the back of his hand. If Yi Guqin had to say that the only thing on his body that could make the sword sect pagoda give him special treatment was probably the elite sequence emblem. As expected, the sword sect pagoda has an inseparable relationship with the sword sect. Perhaps I can find some clues on the 9th level. Yi Guqin's eyes lit up. However, what he needed to solve now was the crisis at hand. The 5 phantoms of the 9 transformations of the divine soul might only be a little difficult for Yi Guqin, but it could not be considered a critical juncture. However, if the 5 phantoms all had a type of sword essence and the sword essences could cooperate with each other to form a sword formation, then their strength would be multiplied. It would not be as simple as 5 phantoms added together. The 5 elements sword essences of these 5 phantoms are only simulated by the sword sect pagoda, but it's also very beneficial for me to comprehend the 5 elements sword essences. Not only did Yi Guqin not have a trace of fear, but he also had a trace of excitement from the challenge. He brandished his Xianming heavy sword and directly rushed forward. The 5 phantoms each had one of the 5 sword essences of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. One of the phantoms brandished his sword, and the sword momentum was like a raging fire. The sword momentum of the other phantoms carried exuberant vitality. It was the wood sword essence. Would help the fire, causing the power of the sword to be even stronger. Yi Guqin did not hold back at all. The 360 golden sword veins around his body bloomed like a bright golden star map. He used the Xianming heavy sword to perform the void sword technique, and a terrifying 1,000 layers of sword wave spread out in an instant. Coupled with the enhancement of the sword veins, it caused the sword wave to turn the sky and earth upside down, rumbling and shaking. Their moves collided, sword light wantonly, and ripples spread out with a roar. Fortunately, the sword sect pagoda had stood tall since the ancient times, and its interior was hard like a rock, so it wouldn't be shaken by this impact. At the same time, the other 3 phantoms also took the opportunity to attack, each displaying their own sword intent. The 5 types of sword intents worked together seamlessly, making Yi Guqin feel a little overwhelmed. Yi Guqin directly pushed the limit of the 10,000 feet Qi Si in his dantian to the limit. Despite the pressure of this place, the terrifying golden true energy still surged out from Yi Guqin's body. Boundless heaven sword art, heavenly net. Yi Guqin's Netharism heavy sword swung out a profound trajectory that formed a net that seemed to cover the heavens and the earth, and it completely trapped all those sword moves within it before being minced into pieces by the sword lights. After that, Yi Guqin also used the Xianming heavy sword to comprehend the edgeless sword essence while fighting with the 5 phantoms. The battle lasted for 10 hours. Although it was a long time, not a single inner courtyard disciple or elder left the sword sect pagoda. This was because they all wanted to know the final result of Yi Guqin's challenge. It's already been 10 hours, and the 6th floor still hasn't lit up. Back then, even senior sister Yan only used 2 hours. As for that Bai Zichen, he only used 4 hours. Could it be that sword sect master Yi is deliberately tempering himself? Just as the outside world was guessing, Yi Guqin, who was on the 6th floor, ran into trouble. because the 5 phantoms had relied on their respective sword intents to form a 5-element sword array that surrounded Yiguchin. This 5-element sword array was extremely profound. Based on the principle of 5 elements, when one person attacked with his sword and the others assisted, the power would be multiplied by 5. 5 experts in the 9 transformations of Divine Soul stacked the power of their sword moves together. The power of each move wasn't any weaker than an ordinary profound martial realm expert's casual attack. Although it's a little troublesome, it still can't stop me, Yiguchin. Yiguchin held the Xianming heavy sword in one hand and grasped the void with the other. Golden Zhenqi condensed into a golden longsword. He attacked with both swords and used the dual sword divergence art once again. After using the dual sword divergence art, Yiguchin was equivalent to 2 people. Not only that, Yiguchin also used the Heartsoft sword intent and the Shura sword intent at the same time. Under the impact of the 2 sword intents, the sword array formed by the 5 sword intents became unstable and began to sway. Whoosh! The 5 phantoms attacked at the same time. The 5 sword intents merged into one and stabbed at Yiguchin. Yiguchin used the Heartsoft sword intent to perform the Tai Chi sword art. On the other hand, he used the Shura sword intent to enhance the God-slaying sword art and perform the 4th move, 3 Paths Boom. The Tai Chi sword art barely blocked the killing move of the 5 sword intents, and the 3 incomparably sharp blood-red rivers also struck the 3 phantoms. Yiguchin took the opportunity to attack and once again used the 5th move, Yama. The fierce and powerful sword with the aura of blood directly swept through the 5 phantoms and destroyed them one by one. The 6th level was passed. Just as Yiguchin destroyed the 5 phantoms, the 6th level of the Sword Sect Pagoda suddenly lit up. He finally passed. Looks like it's a little difficult for Sword Sect Yi to pass the pagoda. Many people heaved a sigh of relief in their hearts. They were afraid that Yiguchin wouldn't even be able to pass the 6th level. That wouldn't be in line with his strength and reputation. Yiguchin, can you pass the 7th level? Yan Wushuang's beautiful eyes were deep as she stared at the 7th level of the Sword Sect Pagoda. Among the inner court disciples, only she and Bai Zichen had passed the 7th level, so she knew how difficult it was. With Yiguchin's current speed, Yan Wushuang doubted if he could pass the 7th level. While everyone was watching, Yiguchin also stepped into the 7th level. The 7th level of the Sword Sect Pagoda was incomparably empty. As soon as Yiguchin entered the 7th level, he felt a terrifying pressure that almost caused his true chi and soul power to be imprisoned. The current Yiguchin was almost unable to use his true chi and soul power. Opposite Yiguchin, there was a gray vortex that was still spinning. With the arrival of Yiguchin, the vortex slowly condensed into a figure that was no different from Yiguchin. Is it this kind of test again? Yiguchin muttered to himself as he looked at the figure that was almost identical to him. He'd experienced such an illusion where he fought against himself in the 18 blood prisons of the Bloodthirst Tower. Of course, Yiguchin was certain that this wasn't an illusion, but the strange power of the Sword Sect Pagoda. If he wanted to pass the 7th level, he had to defeat his other self. Fortunately, Yiguchin didn't sense any true chi from his other self. Otherwise, it would really be difficult to fight. However, what Yiguchin didn't know was that when Yan Wushuang and the others were challenging the pagoda, they were able to retain 30% of their true chi and soul power. However, when it came to Yiguchin, he didn't have a trace of true chi, just like the shadow of his other self. There was a fundamental difference in difficulty between retaining 30% of one's true chi and soul power and not retaining anything at all. Chapter 359. Staring at his other self, Yiguchin's face was cold and solemn. He did not act rashly. Instead, he performed the first move of the God-slaying sword technique, blood slaughter. A blood-red sword light shot out. Just as Yiguchin drew his sword, the shadow on the opposite side also drew his sword at the same time. That sword was also a bloodbath. When the two collided, the sword light was annihilated. Just as I expected. Yiguchin's eyes flashed with a dark light. It seemed that the shadow was able to copy Yiguchin's own moves as he had imagined. No wonder Yan Wushuang and the others were stuck at the 7th level for so long. This level is indeed not something that anyone can pass, but for me, this is the best place to practice the edgeless sword essence. Yi Guqin's eyes had a hint of excitement. After he obtained the Xianming heavy sword, he could already begin to comprehend the edgeless sword essence. The comprehension of the edgeless sword essence was a process of creating something from nothing. Although the illusory figure could imitate Yi Guqin's moves, it was impossible for it to comprehend a kind of sword essence out of nothing. Therefore, as long as Yi Guqin could comprehend a trace of the embryonic form of the edgeless sword essence, he could naturally pass this level. Come on. Yi Guqin held the Xianming heavy sword in his hand and clashed with the self-shadow. Yi Guqin did not use any sword moves. Instead, he simply performed the most basic moves. Hack, chop, collapse, lift, block, cut, stab, sweep, chop, slice. This was the true essence of the edgeless sword essence. The heavy sword was edgeless. There was no need for any gorgeous and complicated sword moves. Only the simplest moves could erupt with the greatest power. Breaking 10,000 pounds with one force was the true essence of the edgeless sword essence. After Yi Guqin completely comprehended the edgeless sword essence, when he casually swung his sword, it would erupt with an endless vibration sword wave that roared in all directions. While Yi Guqin was training, the people outside had been waiting for an entire day. However, everyone also knew that the 7th floor was not so easy to pass. Yi Guqin, with your previous speed, you should give up on this level as soon as possible. Bai Zichen stared fixedly at the 7th level of the sword sect pagoda. He did not want Yi Guqin to create another miracle. On the other side, Yan Wushuang also had a rare trace of nervousness. She shamelessly challenged Yi Guqin to a rematch. She had already challenged the sword sect pagoda many times, but this was Yi Guqin's first time challenging the pagoda. If she was still unable to defeat Yi Guqin, then Yan Wushuang would really be ashamed. This wait lasted for a total of 3 days. 3 days later, on the 7th level of the sword sect pagoda, Yi Guqin seemed to have fallen into a state of indulgence. Every time he swung the Xianming heavy sword, a profound sword concept would faintly suffuse the air. As this concept suffused the air, waves of sword wave also washed out from the Xianming heavy sword. On the other hand, the illusory figure was obviously unable to comprehend this profound sword concept, so the power of his moves started to gradually weaken compared to Yi Guqin's. The heavy sword has no edge, and it doesn't pursue extreme complexity and sharpness. Instead, it seeks to return to simplicity, and every move is completely natural. There was no need to mention Yi Guqin's talent in the sword Dao. At this moment, a faint light appeared in his dazed expression. At a certain moment, Yi Guqin's eyes suddenly lit up. He held the Xianming heavy sword with both hands and swung it out once again. It looked ordinary and nothing special. However, as this sword was swung out, an invisible and terrifying vibration swept out and directly enveloped the illusory figure. On the other hand, the illusory figure was unable to execute such a powerful move. In an instant, the illusory figure collapsed. At the same time, the 7th level of the sword sect pagoda suddenly lit up. This caused everyone outside the sword sect pagoda, including the 2 elders, Qing He and Gu Tuo, to be shocked. Although Yi Guqin had spent a few times more time than Yan Wushuang and Bai Zichen. However, as long as he could pass through it, everything would not be a problem. He really passed. Yan Wushuang clenched her jade-like hands tightly. Her delicate face was filled with a complicated expression for a moment. She originally thought that she would definitely win if she could pass through the 7th level. However, she did not expect Yi Guqin, who was challenging the pagoda for the first time, to have the ability to pass through the 7th level. Although he had spent a lot more time than her, this battle was only about the result. With Yi Guqin's current results, it was already a draw with Yan Wushuang. Looks like the battle between senior sister Yan and senior brother Yi will end in a draw. Some of the surrounding disciples' gazes also fell on Yan Wushuang. However, to Yan Wushuang, she was somewhat unable to accept the result of a draw. What she wanted was a victory, not a draw. Shuang, don't take it to heart. Ji Ling walked to Yan Wushuang's side and comforted her by placing her hand on her shoulder. I can't accept this result. Yan Wushuang's chest rose and fell. It was obvious that her emotions were fluctuating. On the other side, Bai Zichen's expression was also somewhat ugly. Although Yi Guchen's performance this time could not be considered as extremely stunning, it was already on par with him. Just as everyone was waiting for Yi Guchen to come out of the pagoda, they discovered that Yi Guchen did not come out. This scene stunned many of the inner court disciples for a moment. Could it be that brother Yi? Chu Qingqi, Yi Xia, and the others were also stunned as if they had thought of something, and their faces were filled with shock. Could it be that senior brother Yi is going to challenge the 8th level? An inner court disciple could not hide his shock as he shouted. This caused the minds of all the disciples to buzz. The 8th level of the Sword Sect Pagoda. It was a place that only Feng Manlu, Qiu Shan, and Yan Changge had the ability to pass through. At this moment, even Yan Wushuang's jade-like face froze. Her red lips were slightly open as if she was in disbelief. This was because she knew how difficult it was to pass through the 7th level. She had to face another version of herself. Even if Yan Wushuang could preserve 30% of her true energy and soul power, she had exhausted all her energy to pass through. However, Yi Guchen actually still had the energy to pass through the 8th level. From this point alone, Yi Guchen had already won. This caused Yan Wushuang's beautiful face to turn slightly pale, and her delicate body faintly trembled. Moreover, this was because Yan Wushuang did not know the difficulty of Yi Guchen's pagoda. If she knew, her reaction would not be just like this. Can Sword Sect Yi pass through the 8th level? Outside the Sword Sect Pagoda, everyone's gazes were fixated on the 8th level. Within the Sword Sect Pagoda, Yi Guchen's footsteps had finally stepped onto the 8th level. However, the moment he stepped onto the 8th level, the surrounding space seemed to have instantly changed. He was situated in an empty space. There was nothing but swords between the heavens and the earth. Countless flying swords densely packed together covered the heavens and the earth. At the same time, an ethereal voice resounded in the heavens and the earth. 10,000 swords destruction, you can pass through. A light flashed in Yi Guchen's eyes. Just as his voice sounded out, the countless flying swords in the heavens and the earth charged towards Yi Guchen in unison. This was the test of the 8th level, the baptism of 10,000 swords. Chapter 360. As far as the eye could see, there were only swords. Other than swords, there was nothing else. Just as the illusory voice fell, the countless flying swords that were originally circling around seemed to have received an order and rushed toward Yi Guchen. The flying swords that covered the sky and covered the earth swept over together. The scene was no less spectacular than Yi Guchen's million returning swords. In fact, it was even more magnificent. However, it was not a good thing for Yi Guchen. He turned the Xianming heavy sword around. The thick and broad sword was like a black shield that covered Yi Guchen's body. Yi Guchen did not find any spiritual inscription arrays on the Xianming heavy sword, so he did not know the grade of the Xianming heavy sword. However, Yi Guchen was very clear about one characteristic of the heavy sword. It was sturdiness, unparalleled sturdiness. It was as though nothing could break it. It was also because of this that the sword could attack and defend. Clang! 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 In the next moment, Yi Guchen felt countless flying swords colliding with the Xianming heavy sword. A strong impact force caused Yi Guchen to retreat a few hundred feet. The blood in his chest could not help but churn. Swoosh! 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 After a round of collision, countless flying swords surrounded Yi Guchen again and surrounded him. I can't just passively defend. Yi Guchen frowned. The voice had said that one could only pass through by destroying the 10,000 swords. If that's the case, then... Yi Guchen glanced around. He did not hold back anymore and completely unleashed his strength. Soul-devouring secret skill. Yiguchen directly used the trump card that he had not used for a long time, the soul-devouring secret skill. After advancing to the 6th transformation of Divine Soul, his soul-devouring secret skill had also increased accordingly. With Yiguchen's body as the starting point, a terrifying devouring power began to frantically devour the surrounding spiritual qi. The spirit energy within the sword sect pagoda was extremely dense, so the might of the spirit-devouring secret technique rose explosively. Divine Soul 7th Transformation. 8th Divine Soul Transformation. Divine Soul 9 Transformations. In the end, Yiguchen's cultivation had almost reached the peak of the 9 transformations of the Divine Soul. As for the hidden latch of life and death, it was a threshold. Even the spirit-devouring secret skill could not allow Yiguchen to possess the power of the hidden latch of life and death. A terrifying power gathered in his body. If it wasn't for his perfect body, he might have been in danger of exploding. Boom! Yiguchen's real qi and soul power spread out. The 360 golden sword veins in his body were pushed to the limit. At the same time, his flawless body also burst out. Golden light flowed on his skin, mixed with a greenish gold light, making him look perfect and flawless. Yiguchen's fingers clenched again, and an incomparably solid golden real qi longsword condensed. He held the golden longsword in his left hand and the Xianming heavy sword in his right hand, once again performing the dual sword divergence. At this moment, Yiguchen's battle strength was almost at its peak. He struck out with both swords, performing different sword techniques. The powerful sword qi tore through the air, and countless flying swords in the surroundings were shattered by the sword qi. But what followed was even more flying swords. Sword essence, out! Yiguchen once again released his sword essence, performing the Tai Chi sword technique with the hard and soft sword essence, and reflected the power of the flying swords. At the same time, he pushed the Shura sword essence to the limit. The vigorous sword essence turned into a majestic sea of blood, surging with a loud bang. An extremely illusory 18 levels of blood prison appeared. The 18 levels of Shura blood sea reappeared. God-slaying sword technique, Yama. Boom! A boundless blood-red figure rose from the ground behind Yiguchen. Just like Yiguchen, it held a sword in its hand and swept out. It was as if Yama had attacked, and the boundless blood-red sword light shattered a large number of flying swords around it. Come again, purple void mysterious thunder. Yiguchen growled, and the silver-purple void mysterious thunder burst out. The thunder formed by the fusion of two different types of thunder was incomparably powerful. The entire area was filled with lightning, as if it was a sea of lightning. Countless flying swords were shattered by the power of the strange thunder. It could be said that Yiguchen, who had displayed his full cultivation, was so powerful that it was somewhat terrifying. If it were the 5 phantoms on the 6th level who possessed the sword essence, if they encountered the current Yiguchen, they would only be killed in an instant. But the test on the 8th level was far from that simple. Although Yiguchen's powerful means had shattered most of the flying swords in this world in a short time, there were still countless flying swords in the void. However, in the endless void, there were still countless flying swords that appeared out of thin air. Like a school of fish, they swam towards Yiguchen. These flying swords are endless. Yiguchen's eyes revealed a thoughtful look. Clang! 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 The countless flying swords that appeared once again pierced through the air. Yiguchen blocked them with his sword, but his body continued to bleed. To pass the 8th level, it's definitely not so simple to destroy the flying swords. There must be a way. Yiguchen thought to himself as he defended against the onslaught of the flying swords. He had the sword demon talent, and with the sword heart seed, his comprehension ability was extraordinary. As he pondered, Yiguchen seemed to have some clues. The 8th level. Senior Feng has always been in seclusion on the 8th level, and it was also on the 8th level that Senior Feng comprehended the unity of man and sword. Could it be? Yiguchen's mind shook. He immediately withdrew all his means. He even put away the Xianming heavy sword. Then, he took out a leaf of enlightenment from his origin ring and put it in his mouth. Then, a Tao rhyme gradually spread out. Yiguchen directly sat on the ground with his legs crossed. The surrounding flying swords were still relentlessly rushing towards Yiguchen. Every time they attacked, there were countless bloody wounds on Yiguchen's body. At this moment, Yiguchen's clothes were in tatters, and there were numerous bloody wounds on his body. It was a ghastly sight. But surprisingly, the flying swords did not injure Yiguchen's important parts, such as his heart. Facing such a test, Yiguchen did not move or shake. He closed his eyes and comprehended. There is nothing else in this world, only swords. This is not only a test, but also an opportunity. It is precisely because there are only swords here that it cannot accommodate other external objects. And my own body is an external object to the thousands of swords here. Therefore, the only way to pass this test is to imagine my own body as a sword. And to transform my body into a sword is the so-called. Yiguchen suddenly opened his eyes, and a wave of enlightenment instantly surged into his mind. Unity of man and sword. Just as Yiguchen figured this out, the thousands of swords in the world that were attacking him suddenly froze in place. It was as if at this moment, Yiguchen's body faintly carried sword chi. And at this moment, the thousands of swords around him gradually regarded Yiguchen as a sword, and as one of their own. It was also at this moment that the sword heart seed that had already taken root in Yiguchen's heart cracked again, and an extremely tiny bud seemed to be about to grow out. When the sword heart seed took root, it meant that Yiguchen had comprehended the sword heart illumination. And when this bud completely grew out, it meant that Yiguchen had comprehended the unity of man and sword. At this moment, although this bud had only just begun to grow, it also meant that Yiguchen had already begun to see the profundity of the unity of man and sword. This was equivalent to opening the door for Yiguchen to comprehend the unity of man and sword. And it was also at this moment that the 8th floor of the Sword Sect Pagoda lit up. At this moment, all the elders and disciples outside the pagoda were shocked. Chapter 361. Outside the Sword Sect Pagoda. When they saw the 8th level of the Sword Sect Pagoda light up, the gazes of those inner court disciples that were originally bored stiff from waiting there froze one by one. Their hearts were shaken to the extreme. Not only the disciples, but even Qing He, Gu Tuo, and the other elders were stunned on the spot. They were all people who had passed the 8th level of the Sword Sect Pagoda. Because of this, they knew how difficult the 8th level was. Moreover, the difficulty of the 8th level that they had experienced was not on the same level as the difficulty that Yiguchen had experienced. The obstacle they encountered on the 8th level was a thorny path filled with longswords. However, Yiguchen had to face a world of swords. They did not know that Yiguchen's difficulty was higher than theirs. However, it did not stop Qing He and the others from being shocked. Genius. Yiguchen is a real sword principle genius. Even Elder Qing He could not hide the shock in his heart at this moment. He could not help but exclaim. Gu Tuo was also speechless. He had a grudge against Yiguchen and had always been prejudiced and hostile against Yiguchen. However, Yiguchen's performance time and time again made him, an elder, feel helpless. Previously, he had said that Yiguchen's performance in the Sword Sect Pagoda was not outstanding and could only be considered mediocre. However, the light that lit up on the 8th level was like a fierce slap to his old face. Gu Tuo could not describe how he felt at that moment. Even with Qing He and the other elders' strength and status, they were so shocked, let alone the inner yard disciples. Most of the people there respected Yiguchen to begin with. Thus, when they saw the 8th level light up, they exclaimed in surprise. On the contrary, Yan Wushuang's pretty face was completely frozen. Her delicate figure stiffened on the spot, and her originally rosy lips had turned slightly pale. The 8th level. He passed the 8th level. Yan Wushuang murmured and shook her head slightly as if she could not believe that everything in front of her was real. Only Father, Uncle Feng, and Elder Qiu Shan can pass the 8th level. Yiguchen actually passed it. Yan Wushuang smiled, but there was a trace of self-mockery and helplessness in her smile. Originally, she had shamelessly requested to compete with Yi Guqin again, which was already unreasonable. She thought that she could win, but she still lost in the end. At that moment, Yan Wushuang finally knew why Feng Manlu insisted on Yi Guqin and not her. Sword sect, ah. Yan Wushuang lowered her head slightly as if she had lost her soul. Her beautiful eyes were lifeless. On the other side, Baizichin Wushuang took a few steps back. He seemed to find it difficult to stand still. The fact that Yi Guqin had passed the 8th level was like a bolt from the blue to him. This time, Yi Guqin had left him behind once again. The result of passing through the 8th level was enough to completely erase Yi Guqin's mediocre performance from before. At that moment, in the eyes of everyone, only the shock of creating a miracle was left. Since I, Baizichin, exist in this sword sect pagoda forest, why should Yi Guqin exist? Baizichin laughed bitterly and was speechless. As for Wang Xiaotian, Li Lingxiao, and the others, they swore in their hearts to forget the enmity from before and never offend Yi Guqin again. While everyone in the outside world was shocked by Yi Guqin's passing of the 8th level. On the 8th level, Yi Guqin sat cross-legged in the world of 10,000 swords. A figure appeared not far away. Senior Feng. Yi Guqin was not surprised at all when he saw this figure. Feng Manlu was always in closed-door cultivation on the 8th level of the Sword Sect Pagoda. You really are the destined Sword Sect Master. Feng Manlu placed his hands behind his back. Yi Guqin stood up and asked, "Does Senior know something about the Sword Sect Pagoda?" "There may be some clues on the 9th level, but I can't enter the 9th level," said Feng Manlu. It was also at this moment that a door appeared in the void. "That's the entrance to the 9th level," said Feng Manlu. Although he could not see it, he could sense it. Yi Guqin approached the door. It was at this moment that the golden sword-shaped emblem on the back of his hand released light again, causing the door to tremble. Yi Guqin lifted his hand, wanting to push open the door, but found that the door did not budge. Huh? Yi Guqin was a little puzzled. Even with Senior Feng and the others' divine dwelling stage strength, they can't enter. This means that they lack some kind of qualification. I may be able to make this door tremble because I'm the sword sect sequence, but what I lack is strength. Yi Guqin pondered. Feng Manlu and the others had the strength of a cultivation level, but did not have the qualifications to enter the sequence. Yi Guqin was in the sequence and could make the door tremble, but could not open it. Therefore, Yi Guqin deduced that he could not open the door because he was not strong enough. If the strength of the divine spirit stage is not enough, then I'll try again after I break through to the life and death chamber, Yi Guqin thought. Although he was curious about the 9th level of the Sword Sect Pagoda, he was not in a hurry. Moreover, he had already gained a lot on the 8th level. He had obtained the opportunity to comprehend the unity of man and sword. Thinking of this, Yi Guqin's mind suddenly flashed, and he asked, "Senior Feng, I heard that the reincarnation sword lotus is on the 8th level." Yi Guqin did not forget that the sword sect's ultimate technique, the reincarnation sword lotus, was on the 8th level. Even if it was an incomplete sword sect's ultimate technique, its power was definitely something to look forward to. You can observe the flying swords here, suggested Feng Manlu. Yi Guqin suddenly understood and scanned his surroundings. The more he observed, the more astonished Yi Guqin's eyes became. This was because he discovered that the flying swords that filled the sky faintly formed the shape of a lotus. The reincarnation sword lotus ultimate technique was actually hidden among the flying swords that filled the sky. As expected of the sword sect's ultimate technique, it can't be measured by common sense. Even with Yi Guqin's experience, he was slightly amazed. However, this also represented the extraordinariness of the sword sect's ultimate technique. It was far from ordinary sword arts. I wonder which generation of sword sect's ultimate technique created this reincarnation sword lotus. Yi Guqin thought inwardly. Every generation of sword grandmasters would create their own unique sword grandmasters. For example, 8th generation sword sect's Yi Tianqing's heaven-splitting sword soul. There was also the 7th generation sword sect's Heaven and Earth One sacred sword. Yiguchin even thought that if he really became the 9th generation sword sect's ultimate technique in the future, he would also create an ultimate technique that belonged to the 9th generation sword sect's ultimate technique and pass it down to the younger generation of sword sect. Of course, this kind of thing was still too far away for Yiguchin, so he did not think too much about it. However, what made Yiguchin feel a little troubled was that if he wanted to comprehend the reincarnation sword lotus and further comprehend the union of man and sword, he would not be able to do it in a short period of time. However, it was impossible for him to stay there forever. Yiguchin, rest assured and cultivate here. In the future, you will be like me and have the right to enter the sword sect pagoda at will, Feng Manlu said faintly. That's not very appropriate, Yiguchin said. Although he did not have any objections, it might be a little unfair to the inner yard disciples. It doesn't matter. You have the right. I am well aware of all the stages that you have passed, Feng Manlu said. Yiguchin's eyes flickered slightly. It seemed that Feng Manlu already knew that the difficulty of the stages that he had passed was different from the others. I will explain to the people outside. You can rest assured and comprehend here. Feng Manlu said and immediately left the place. When Yiguchin heard this, he no longer hesitated and began to comprehend in peace. Chapter 362. Outside the sword sect pagoda, there was a hubbub of voices that lingered for a long time. After all, Yiguchin had created another miracle. Only the top 3 experts of the sword sect pagoda had passed the 8th floor. However, Yiguchin was able to pass the 8th floor with his divine soul realm cultivation. In the hearts of the inner court disciples, Yiguchin had long been their spiritual target. Some even believed that if Yiguchin grew stronger in the future, his strength wouldn't be any weaker than Feng Manlu and Yen Chang'e. Yiguchin would be the 4th expert of the sword sect pagoda in the future. Sword sect master Yi hasn't come out yet. Could it be that he wants to pass the 9th floor? A disciple couldn't help but guess. Forget it. Even the sect master and Lord Feng Manlu can't enter the 9th floor. As for sword sect master Yi, he might have a chance in the future, but I'm afraid it'll be difficult for him now. Some people shook their heads. Just as everyone was discussing, a ray of light flashed outside the 8th floor of the sword sect pagoda and a figure appeared. Could it be that senior brother Yi has come out? Many disciples, including the elders, looked over. It's Lord Feng Manlu. When they saw the figure clearly, the elders and disciples cupped their hands and bowed. The sword sect pagoda's trial has ended. Everyone can leave now. Feng Manlu said indifferently. Lord Feng Manlu, that Yiguchin. Elder Qing, he said hesitantly. In the future, Yiguchin will have the qualifications to cultivate in the sword sect pagoda for a long time like me. Feng Manlu's tone was calm as he waved his hand casually. What? Everyone was shocked when they heard this. Even Elder Qing He and Elder Gu Tua were a little stunned. This was already considered a privilege. Even elders like them didn't have the qualifications to stay in the sword sect pagoda every day. For a long time, the sword sect pagoda had been Feng Manlu's place for seclusion. This was also a privilege that Yen Chang'e had tacitly allowed. However, other than Feng Manlu, Yiguchin also had the qualifications to enter the sword sect pagoda. I refuse to accept this. Suddenly, a voice rang out. When the disciples looked over, they saw Baizichin's face was pale. He gritted his teeth and forced himself to speak. Right now, Yiguchin was like a huge mountain pressing down on Baizichin's head. If Yiguchin was able to cultivate behind closed doors in the sword sect pagoda for a long time, then Baizichin was unable to imagine how swift his improvement would be. It was precisely because of this that Baizichin had no choice but to bite the bullet and speak even if he risked defending wind-sweeping tower. Lord Feng Manlu, even though Yiguchin has passed through the 8th level of the sword sect tower, he is only an inner court disciple after all. If he is allowed to cultivate in the sword sect tower alone, how can it be considered fair to the other inner court disciples? Bai Zichen resisted the pressure as he raised his head to look at Feng Manlu and cupped his hands together. The surrounding group of inner academy disciples were all silent. Although they respected Yi Guqin, they didn't feel comfortable that Yi Guqin alone had such qualifications. Only Chu Qingqi, Yi Xia, and the others didn't care. Instead, they hoped that Yi Guqin would get this opportunity. Yan Wushuang had a complicated expression on her face. She vaguely felt that the gap between her and Yi Guqin had gradually widened. Feng Manlu didn't show any anger after being contradicted by Bai Zichen. Instead, he said indifferently, "You said that Yi Guqin doesn't have the qualifications to obtain this right. Then do you know that the sword sect tower he challenged is the same as the sword sect tower you challenged?" "What do you mean?" All the disciples present were somewhat puzzled when they heard Feng Manlu's words. Only Yan Wushuang's delicate body suddenly trembled as if she had thought of something. Her beautiful eyes gradually widened. She thought of something. With Yi Guqin's ability to pass through the 8th level, how could his speed be so slow? "Since you don't know, I'll tell you. On the 1st level of the sword sect tower, Yi Guqin faced 10 puppets at the 4th transformation." Feng Manlu said. "What? 10 puppets at the 4th transformation? Isn't there a puppet at the 3rd transformation?" Everyone present was in disbelief when they heard Feng Manlu's words. It was as if they had heard something ridiculous. Bai Zichen's face also turned pale. On the 2nd level of the sword sect tower, Yi Guqin faced 20 puppets at the 7th transformation. At the same time, there was also a pressure suppression. On the 3rd level of the sword sect tower, there were 40 puppets at the 8th transformation. Moreover, the pressure was doubled. On the 5th level of the sword sect tower. On the 6th level, on the 7th level, as Feng Manlu spoke. With every sentence he spoke, the shock in everyone's eyes became even more intense. On the other hand, Bai Zichen's face turned even paler. At the same time, Yan Wushuang's feelings were incomparably complicated. Although she had vaguely guessed before, she didn't dare to be sure and wasn't willing to admit this fact. However, these words came from the mouth of Feng Manlu, who she respected the most. Naturally, it couldn't be false. Moreover, with Feng Manlu's status in the sword sect tower, no one would doubt that Feng Manlu was lying. So, Yi Guqin's difficulty in challenging the sword sect tower is more than 10 times that of all of you. In this case, do you still think that he doesn't have the qualifications to stay in the sword sect tower? Feng Manlu flicked his sleeves and said indifferently. The entire outside of the sword sect tower was silent. At this point, who still dared to say that Yi Guqin didn't have the qualifications? Even Bai Zichen, who was the first to say that he was unconvinced at the beginning, stood frozen on the spot in a daze. He didn't have the slightest temper. Not only did Yi Guqin break his and Yan Wushuang's record, but it was also 10 times more difficult in the sword sect tower. If it was Bai Zichen or Yan Wushuang, it was hard to say if they could pass the 6th level if the difficulty was 10 times higher. "Uncle Feng, Shuang, lost," Yan Wushuang muttered in a daze. No matter how thick-skinned she was, she couldn't say that she wanted to compete with Yi Guqin a 3rd time. She was a young girl after all, and she still cared about her face. "Don't be discouraged. Continue to work hard." Feng Manlu nodded slightly and turned to enter the sword sect tower. After an entire 15 minutes, the clamor became a boiling cauldron once more. No wonder sword sect Yi took so long to pass through the tower. So it turns out that his difficulty is 10 times higher than ours. Oh my god, if it was me, I probably wouldn't even be able to pass through the 3rd level. Many disciples discussed with sighs of admiration. Obviously, Yi Guqin had created another miracle. Yi Guqin had shocked everyone in the 3 great fortuitous encounters. On the other hand, Yan Wushuang and Bai Zichen, who had passed through the 7th level and attracted everyone's attention, were not discussed by many people at this moment. Yan Wushuang shook her head slightly when she saw this scene, and an extremely bitter smile appeared on the corners of her mouth. "Shuang, Ji Ling stepped forward and looked at Yan Wushuang with worry in her beautiful eyes. "It's nothing. I'm just a little tired. I'm going to rest. At this moment, Yan Wushuang's voice actually contained a rare trace of exhaustion and weakness, causing others to feel pity for her. On the other side, Bai Zichen left in a daze. No one paid attention to him. With the end of the Sword Sect Tower, the Sword Sect Tower forest returned to its peaceful state. However, because of Yi Guqin, the disciples of the inner courtyard worked even harder in their cultivation, and all of them set Yi Guqin as their goal. Yi Guqin had also been staying on the 8th level of the Sword Sect Tower, comprehending the mystery of the reincarnation Sword Lotus and the union of man and sword. Just when the Sword Sect Tower forest was peaceful, a shocking piece of news shook the entire Saint Origin dynasty like a clap of thunder. The Great Wall of the Great Desolation Mansion had been breached by the Land of Five Elements barbarian tribe. Many elders and disciples of the 7 major forces, including the Great General and the garrison of the Saint Origin dynasty, had all died. Chapter 363. In the inner courtyard of the Sword Sect Pagoda, on a tall mountain peak, an incomparably magnificent and solemn hall was located within. This was the core of the inner courtyard, and also the place where the upper echelons of the Sword Sect Pagoda discussed matters. At this moment, Qing He, Gu Tuo, Shi Yun and many other elders of the inner courtyard had all appeared in the hall. On a high platform in the middle, the white-robed great elder Qiu Shan sat cross-legged on a praying mat with a solemn expression. How is this possible? The Great Wall of the Desolate Border is not only guarded by the army of the Saint Yuan dynasty, but also many life and death gate elders of the 7 great forces. In addition, there is also the great General Juanzhan of the Desolate Border. He is a divine dwelling stage expert. Elder Qing He's voice was filled with disbelief. The Great Wall of the Desolate Border was located at the border of the Great Desolate Mansion, adjacent to the Land of the Five Elements. Several hundred years ago, a powerful expert had appeared in the barbarian race of the Land of the Five Elements. He had condensed the 5 ancestral totems and was known as the Five-Crown King. At that time, the strength of the barbarian race had reached its peak. Even if the Saint Yuan dynasty and the 7 great forces joined forces, it would still be difficult to deal with the barbarian race. During the critical period of the barbarian race's invasion, the mysterious and powerful 5-Crown Kings suddenly disappeared without a trace. This caused the barbarian race to be in chaos, which gave the Saint Yuan dynasty and the 7 great forces the opportunity to defeat the barbarian race and drive them back to the Land of the Five Elements. Since then, the Saint Yuan dynasty had built the incomparably magnificent Great Wall of the Desolate Border at the border of the Great Desolate Mansion and the Land of the Five Elements. It was used to resist the barbarian race's invasion for a long time. Not only that, the 7 great forces also had people stationed at the Great Wall of the Desolate Border for a long time. It could be said that the Great Wall of the Desolate Border was the strongest line of defense against the barbarian race. However, news had spread in the past few days that the Great Wall of the Desolate Border had been breached and the great General Juanzhan, who was stationed at the border, had died in battle. This news was no different from a bolt from the blue, and it shook the entire Saint Yuan dynasty and the 7 great forces. What the hell is going on? That General Juanzhan is an expert of the divine dwelling stage. Even if the barbarian race also has a divine dwelling stage expert, he should be able to escape even if he can't win, another elder said in confusion. The divine dwelling stage was already considered the top experts in the Saint Origin Empire and the surrounding regions. Logically speaking, if such a powerhouse wanted to escape, it would be very difficult to make him stay. Another impressive expert has appeared in the barbarian tribe, Qiu Shan said calmly. What? Could it be another 5-Crown King? The expressions of the many elders below changed upon hearing this. That's not necessarily the case. That expert from the Brute tribe is known as the Heavenly Barbarian King. Although his strength is not as strong as the 5-Crown King from hundreds of years ago, he has also reached the peak of the divine dwelling realm. That's why Fang Zhan did not even have the chance to retreat, Qiu Shan said. If that's the case, I'm afraid only several divine dwelling experts will have a chance to deal with the Heaven Barbarian King, Elder Qing he said thoughtfully. Yes, it's not just the Heaven Barbarian King. There's another young genius in the barbarian tribe. He's called the Four-Crown King. I'm afraid his talent is not much weaker than the Five-Crown King from hundreds of years ago, Qiu Shan said. I heard that the Four-Crown King is extremely arrogant. He even said that he would sweep away all the top heaven prides of the seven great forces by himself. The ignorant are really fearless, Elder Gu Tuo said with a cold smile. Whether it's the Heaven Barbarian King or the Four-Crown King, we have to treat them with caution. 1/3 of the hundreds of cities in the Great Desolate Prefecture have fallen into the hands of the barbarian race. 7 days later, the seven great forces will hold an exchange meeting in the Great Desolate Prefecture's northern Liang city to discuss countermeasures against the barbarian race. You should instruct the disciples to get ready, Qiu Shan said. Yes. The many inner institute elders gave a cupped fist salute and then left to make preparations. If the Four-Crown King grows up, he will definitely be a great threat. Among the top heaven prides of the seven great forces, there are very few who can compete with him, Qiu Shan said with a deep look in his eyes. He suddenly thought of Yi Guqin. Even though he'd always been prejudiced against Yi Guqin, he had no choice but to admit now that Yi Guqin was indeed worthy of being number one amongst the inner court disciples of the Sword Sect's Forest of Pagodas, and it was even to the extent that Yan Wushuang was slightly inferior to him. Yi Guqin, will you be able to shock everyone in the fight against the barbarian race this time? Qiu Shan thought to himself. After the meeting, the entire Sword Sect Pagoda Forest was filled with a rare tension. Not only the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, but the entire Saint Origin dynasty, including the seven great forces, were also mobilized. In the western part of the Saint Origin dynasty, the base of the limitless Sword Sect, Spirit Heaven Mountain. A young man in a black and white Taoist robe was sitting under a lone pine tree on the peak of a mountain. He had long black and white hair that fluttered in the wind. His eyes were like stars and his aura was deep and long. He was the top heaven pride of the limitless Sword Sect, Xian Hao. After the Void Sword Realm, Xian Hao had been recuperating, cultivating and calming his mind. Not far away, two figures suddenly appeared and walked over slowly. The two figures were a man and a woman. The man was dressed in white. He was tall and had a jade-like appearance. The woman was dressed in a black dress. Her face was delicate and charming, bright and charming. Most importantly, this pair of man and woman actually had similar facial features. They were twins of different sexes. Xian Hao, it won't be long before we head to the Great Desolation Prefecture, northern Liang City. Don't miss it, the man in white said with a faint smile. Xian Hao did not even raise his eyes. Seeing Xian Hao's attitude, the woman in the black dress curled her lips and said with a hint of sarcasm, my brother Feng came here to remind you out of kindness. TSK, didn't the trip to the Void Sword Realm wake you up? Boom. Just as the woman in the black dress finished her words, Xian Hao suddenly opened his eyes and a strong and boundless aura spread out. Xian Dai, how dare you be presumptuous in front of me? Xian Hao said coldly. Xian Hao, I'm afraid it's ungentlemanly to treat a woman like this. The man in white stepped forward and his tone became indifferent. Brother Feng, I'm so scared. The woman called Xian Dai's delicate body was tightly attached to the man in white, but her tone was playful. Did the failure in the Void Sword Realm give you the confidence to provoke me? I, Xian Hao, will accompany you anytime. Xian Hao's eyes were as sharp as swords. The man and woman's faces changed slightly, but there was not much fear in their eyes. Then let's see who can help the sect to win first place in the exchange. The man in white did not say anything more and left with the woman in the black dress. Xian Hao's face turned cold as he looked at their backs. The man and woman were called Xian Feng and Xian Dai. They were both supreme talents of the Nine Changes Divine Soul Realm. They had another name in the Saint Origin dynasty, Black and White Impermanence. They were also the most outstanding supreme talents of the limitless Sword Sect other than Xian Hao. Their strength did not lie in their individual strength. Instead, when they worked together, the superimposed strength caused Xian Hao to be extremely fearful. However, Xian Hao did not see them as competitors. The opponent he recognized was Yiguchin. It's a pity that you're already dead. Otherwise, I'd really like to fight with you again in the exchange. Xianhao found it hard to calm down when he thought of the various things that happened in the Void Sword realm. As a supreme talent, this was the first time he was in such a sorry state, losing repeatedly in the hands of others. However, in Xianhao's eyes, Yiguchin was already dead. Obviously, a dead person had no value. Xianhao heaved a sigh of relief, but at the same time, he felt it was a pity that he had missed an opponent. Yiguchin is already dead. Then, there are not many people who can threaten me. The young war emperor, Lv Qinghan, and Gu Zun. Xianhao's eyes were deep as he looked into the distance. Chapter 364. In a desolate mountain range in the north of the Saint Origin dynasty, a towering pitch-black city stood there, giving off a domineering aura. This city was where the saber-sealing monarch palace resided. At this moment, a black-clothed youth was sitting on top of a tall building in the city. Around his body, there was a black stream of genuine qi swirling around like black pythons. It looked cold and terrifying. There was a saber on his knees. The saber was pitch black and covered in demonic runes. It looked like it could cut through one's gaze. He was the strongest of the 3 sabers in the saber-sealing monarch palace, Ling Ju. I must take first place in the competition between the 7 forces. It's a pity that Yiguchin is dead. Otherwise, I would like to experience the feeling of defeating the sword sect with my own hands. Ling Ju's tone was cold and indifferent. At the same time, Ling Ju looked at the other side of the city. There was a mountain with a pitch-black cave on top of it. Gu Zun, you have been in seclusion in the Saber King's ancient cave for an entire year. What are you trying to comprehend? Ling Ju thought. As the strongest of the 3 sabers and the second on the heavenly saber list, he was invincible among the younger generation in the saber-sealing monarch palace. He was only wary of Gu Zun. If Ling Ju was a genius in the saber Dao, then Gu Zun was a genius. Gu Zun's obsession with the saber surprised Ling Ju. Many disciples in the saber-sealing monarch palace even called Gu Zun a madman behind his back. However, they didn't dare to say it out loud. It wasn't just because Gu Zun was strong and ranked first on the heavenly saber list, it was also because of his identity. He was the only direct disciple of Huang Dao Yufan. Will you go to this exchange meeting or not? Ling Ju muttered to himself. In the Saber King's ancient cave, it was dark and gloomy. Countless broken sabers filled the entire ancient cave. In the deepest part of the ancient cave, a skinny figure sat quietly with his legs crossed. It was a youth. His hair was messy and his beard was unshaven. His clothes were tattered and emitted an unpleasant smell. His skin was also covered in stains, and there were also many knife marks all over it. In the deepest part of the Saber King's ancient cave, the saber qi in the void was already incomparably sharp. It was not something an ordinary disciple could withstand. However, the saber qi was no longer a threat to the sloppy figure in front of him. In front of the unkempt young man, there was an ancient rusty saber stabbed into the ground. At the same time, there was a simple cut on the wall in front of him. The sloppy youth occasionally looked at the rusty ancient saber, and occasionally looked at the saber mark on the cave wall. He read it for an entire year. For the past year, he did not eat or drink. He only consumed spirit pills and spirit pills. The rest of the time, he just stared blankly at the ancient saber and the saber mark. His pitch-black eyes were bloodshot, as if he had been possessed. A peerless saber strike, a peerless saber strike. He muttered as if he had lost his mind. Tap, tap, following a series of footsteps, a middle-aged man in a golden robe with a slightly aged face walked to the deepest part of the cave and stared at the sloppy young man who had been sitting with his legs crossed the whole time. Gu Zun, it has already been a year. The middle-aged man let out a sigh. If there were any disciples of the saber-conferred monarch palace here, they would definitely recognize this middle-aged man. He was the vice palace master of the saber-conferred monarch palace, Imperial Saber Yubufan. It's not enough. It's still not enough. I have yet to comprehend the peerless saber strike. The sloppy youth named Guzun shook his head. This peerless blade, even I have only comprehended 30% of it. Relying on this 30%, I am able to fight evenly with Feng Manlu on the Violet Peak. As for you, Guzun, you have already comprehended 50% of it. You are more outstanding than your master. Yu Bufan's eyes were filled with gratification but also a complicated expression. Guzun was his only successor and also the person who would represent him at the Violet Peak. Feng Manlu, the 10-year deadline is approaching. Who will you choose? Yan Wushuang. Yu Bufan thought inwardly. He had thought about Yi Guqin before, but there was news that Yi Guqin had died in the Void Sword realm. As for Bai Zichen, Yuan Mia and the other Sword Dao geniuses, although they were not bad, they had not reached the peak. Therefore, in Yu Bufan's eyes, Feng Manlu's only choice in the entire Sword Sect Pagoda Forest was Yan Wushuang. However, Yu Bufan was confident that Yan Wushuang would not be a match for Guzun. Guzun was the most suitable person to practice the saber among all the people that Yu Bufan had seen. Guzun's obsession and craziness sometimes made Yu Bufan amazed. He believed that there were not many people in the Saint Origin dynasty who were more talented than Guzun in the saber Dao. If the sword sect's Yi Guqin was still alive, he might have a chance to fight against Guzun. But if it's Yan Wushuang, wind-sweeping tower, you've already lost this battle of the Forbidden City. Yu Bufan thought to himself. He shook his head and left, not bothering Guzun anymore. After Yu Bufan left, Guzun's bloodshot eyes looked at the rusty ancient saber in front of him. He murmured, not enough. Still not enough. I need to kill more people to test this saber. Guzun murmured. He suddenly stood up, stretched out his hands, grasped the handle of the ancient saber and pulled it out. Rumble. At this moment, the Saber King's ancient cave trembled violently. The terrifying tremors even spread out of the mountain and across the entire Steel City. Bang! Guzun roared as he pulled out the ancient rusty blade that even the Hall Master of the Sealed Blade Monarch Hall couldn't pull out. As soon as the ancient saber was drawn out, a terrifying murderous aura burst out like an ancient demonic mountain. If it were an ordinary person, they would have been so scared that they would have collapsed to the ground and their minds would have gone blank. But Guzun did not seem to be affected at all. 7 kills. The name of the saber is 7 kills. Guzun's hand brushed across the rusty body of the saber. The 2 ancient words 7 kills were engraved on the blade. He carried the saber and walked out of the Saber King's ancient cave. His target was the Great Desolate Mansion, not the so-called exchange meeting in northern Yang City. He decided to go alone to the city that was occupied by the barbarian race. He needed to kill more people to test out his peerless saber. On this day, Guzun, who was known as the Saber Maniac, finally left the sealed Saber King Palace after a year of seclusion. He wanted to use the 7 kills ancient saber to test his saber Dao and shake the entire dynasty. In the eastern part of the Saint Origin dynasty, in a valley where flowers bloomed. Many exquisite and gorgeous palaces and pavilions stood in the valley, contrasting beautifully with the flowers. This was the residence of one of the 7 major forces, the Consonance Palace. In one of the secluded courtyards, a figure in pink was playing the zither, and the sound of the zither was sorrowful. Her face was beautiful and she was naturally beautiful. At this moment, there was sadness and loneliness in her eyes. She was Zither Fairy. Unknowingly, a beautiful figure in snow-white clothes stood quietly behind Zither Fairy. After a while, Zither Fairy finally noticed. She turned her head and said, "So it's Senior Sister Lu." The woman in front of him was dressed in a snow-white robe. Her skin was as smooth as jade, and she had a natural sense of beauty. It was as if she was a piece of jade that had been meticulously carved by the heavens. She had a head of black hair and a white dress, revealing a classical temperament. She was as cold as smoke. She was like a fairy from the Moon Palace, outstanding and otherworldly. She was the top prodigy of the Consonance Palace, Lu Qinghan. The sound of your zither is sad and sorrowful. It's like your mourning, and it's even filled with longing. Let me guess, is it because of the fallen sword master? LV Qinghan's voice was like a clear spring, and it was extremely pleasant. Senior sister. The zither fairy lowered her head slightly with sorrow in her eyes. It's a pity that I didn't get to see the sword master. I want to see what kind of person he is to make you miss him day and night. But it seems that I don't have the chance anymore. Lu Qinghan shook her head slightly, feeling that it was a pity. If senior sister Lu can see Mr. Yi, you will definitely be impressed. The zither fairy said. Oh, is that so? My taste is not low. Lu Qinghan raised her brows. Her temperament was indifferent. Although she wasn't an arrogant person, she wasn't someone ordinary people could touch. There were very few people who could make Lu Qinghan, a prodigy, look at them differently. Sigh, it's a pity that the sword master has fallen. Junior sister, listen to senior sister's advice. People have to look forward. It's useless to linger on the past. Lu Qinghan sighed. Hearing that, the zither fairy's beautiful face became slightly cold. She said, Senior sister, do you want to recommend Zhou Tong to zither fairy again? Zhou Tong is one of the 3 little kings, the little spiritual king. His strength is only second to the little war emperor. Moreover, his character, temperament, and strength are all excellent. Senior sister's taste won't be wrong. Lu Qinghan smiled faintly. Previously, the zither fairy said that Lu Qinghan would definitely be impressed by Yi Guqin. Lu Qinghan said that it wasn't certain. But now, she approved of Zhou Tong. Obviously, she thought that Yi Guqin could at most be on par with Zhou Tong in all aspects. Thank you for your kindness, senior sister. But zither fairy doesn't have any feelings for Zhou Tong. The zither fairy lowered her eyes and said. Sigh, silly junior sister. Senior sister admits that the sword master does have some ability. But thinking about someone who has already passed away will only increase the sadness. That Zhou Tong is very good to you. He even said that he wanted to visit you. Lu Qinghan said. In the past, she had met the little war emperor and Zhou Tong by chance in a secret place. In the end, they found an opportunity together and formed a good relationship. Once, Zhou Tong met the zither fairy by chance. He couldn't forget her and wanted Lu Qinghan to be the matchmaker. Seeing that the zither fairy was depressed day by day, Lu Qinghan was also willing to be the matchmaker and help the zither fairy find new happiness. Senior sister, the zither fairy is tired. The zither fairy didn't want to contradict Lu Qinghan. Because she knew that Lu Qinghan really cared about her. But how could Lu Qinghan know the position that Yi Guqin had in the zither fairy's heart? Seeing that the zither fairy seemed to be dispirited, Lu Qinghan shook her head and said, All right. You should prepare. In a few days, follow me to the northern Liang city to participate in the exchange of the 7 major forces. Zhou Tong and the others will also go. Lu Qinghan thought to herself. At worst, she could matchmake Zhou Tong and the zither fairy in the northern Liang city. Yes. The zither fairy nodded faintly. Her mood was still not high. Seeing this, Lu Qinghan didn't say anything. In her opinion, time would eventually erase everything. There would be a day when the zither fairy would come to terms with it. At that time, she believed that the zither fairy would accept Zhou Tong's love. Lu Qinghan's figure drifted away like smoke. The zither fairy's beautiful eyes were bleak and the sound of her zither sobbed. Young Master Yi, how good would it be if you were still here? Chapter 365. Yi Guqin, who was in seclusion in the Sword Sect Pagoda, naturally did not know that there was a woman in the distance who missed him day and night. Right now, all of his mental strength was placed on comprehending. Yi Guqin quietly sat cross-legged in the world of 10,000 swords. His body was faintly emitting a sharp aura like that of a sword. Of course, this change was still very superficial. After all, Yiguchin had only comprehended the unity of man and sword for a few days. Previously, Yiguchin had taken a long time to comprehend the illuminated sword heart. Comprehending the sword Tao was much more difficult than comprehending sword intent. But Yiguchin had relied on the experience of his previous life, the enlightenment leaf, and the help of the world of 10,000 swords. His comprehension of the unity of man and sword was also very fast. In his heart, the bud of the sword heart seed had already opened a little more. When it completely sprouted, Yiguchin would comprehend the unity of man and sword. After sitting cross-legged for a long time, Yiguchin opened his eyes. He slowly raised his hand, and a sharp sword light pulsed between his fingers. This was not a sword ray formed by the 6 pulses divine sword, but a sword ray formed by his physical body. Yiguchin recalled that Feng Manlu had not used any sword when he attacked. He had only used his fingers as a sword, and when he pointed out, it was as if a sharp sword had pierced the sky. At that time, Feng Manlu was like a sword that could split the sky, displaying its sharpness. It was also because Feng Manlu had comprehended the unity of man and sword that he possessed such terrifying fighting strength. He could even fight across realms, and even half-step divine-dwelling experts like Xian Tai were afraid of him. Of course, Yiguchin's current comprehension of the unity of man and sword was far from Feng Manlu's level. After all, Feng Manlu had been in seclusion on the 8th floor of the Sword Sect Pagoda for nearly 10 years. In addition to Feng Manlu's talent in the sword Tao, his understanding of the unity of man and sword had most likely reached an extremely profound level. The current Yiguchin had only just crossed the threshold of the unity of man and sword. However, Yiguchin also knew that this kind of thing could not be rushed. He could only slowly comprehend it. However, Yiguchin's gains were not limited to this. He slowly raised his hand, and the genuine qi in his body gushed out. Unparalleled sword qi seemed to gather in his palm, and finally formed a slightly illusory golden lotus. If one were to examine it carefully, one would be surprised to see that every petal of this lotus was condensed from sword qi. Yiguchin gently flicked his finger. The golden sword lotus drew a line in the air and swept forward. Then, it expanded and turned into a huge golden sword lotus amidst the soaring sword qi. As the lotus spun, an unparalleled sword qi seemed capable of tearing apart the world. This was the sword sect's ultimate technique, reincarnation sword lotus. Because Yiguchin's true qi was golden, the reincarnation sword lotus was also golden in color. However, a moment later, the sword lotus that was rotating in the void suddenly became unstable and shattered into violent sword qi that filled the sky. The sword sect's ultimate technique is indeed not that easy to cultivate. Yiguchin sighed when he saw this. He had spent a few days on the 8th floor of the Sword Sect Pagoda and consumed another 3 epiphany leaves. However, he could only perform the initial stage of the reincarnation sword lotus. The difficulty of cultivating the sword sect's ultimate technique was no less than that of a Supreme King level sword technique. Most importantly, this was not the complete version of the reincarnation sword lotus. Yiguchin found it hard to imagine how difficult it was to cultivate the complete version of the reincarnation sword lotus. The current me can only perform 18 leaves of the reincarnation sword lotus at most, and it is not very stable. However, even an incomplete reincarnation sword lotus has 72 leaves, Yiguchin thought to himself. The more leaves the reincarnation sword lotus had, the stronger its power. The current Yiguchin could only perform 18 leaves of the reincarnation sword lotus at most. On the other hand, the reincarnation sword lotus that Feng Manlu performed that day had 72 leaves. It seems that cultivating the reincarnation sword lotus is not something that can be accomplished overnight. Now that I've reached the threshold of becoming one with the sword, I've also begun to understand the reincarnation sword lotus. I should leave first, Yiguchin thought to himself. He did not forget his goal, which was to go to the 5 elemental land to find the sacred herb. Su Jianchu's situation could not be delayed. Yiguchin left the Sword Sect Pagoda in a flash. After not coming out for a long time, Yiguchin took a deep breath. He had gained a lot in the sword sect pagoda this time. The embryonic form of the edgeless sword intent had taken shape, and he had also begun to understand the mysteries of becoming one with the sword. He had also learned the reincarnation sword lotus. As for the complete version, Yiguchin believed that it should be on the 9th floor. However, with Yiguchin's current cultivation, it was difficult for him to even condense the 72 leaves of the reincarnation sword lotus. Therefore, he was not in a hurry. Yiguchin left the sword sect pagoda. Along the way, he was surprised to find that the entire inner court seemed empty. Why is there no one here? Yiguchin frowned slightly. At this moment, an inner court disciple came over. When he saw Yiguchin, his eyes were filled with surprise. He hurriedly went forward and cupped his hands together. "Senior brother Yi, you've finally come out." Yiguchin looked at the inner court disciple in front of him. He realized that the inner court disciple's attitude towards him seemed to be even more respectful than before. "What happened?" Yiguchin asked. "It's like this." The inner court disciple recounted the recent news in detail. "I see. The barbarian race has already breached the Great Wall of the Desolate Border. The 7 great factions have sent their elders and disciples to the Great Desolate Mansion to participate in the exchange and discuss countermeasures." Yiguchin thought to himself. Previously, Lord Feng Manlu instructed that no one is to disturb senior brother Yi. He also said that after senior brother comes out of seclusion, if you have nothing else to do, you can ride the Green Sky Eagle to the Great Desolate Mansion's northern Yang City to participate in the exchange. The disciple said respectfully. "Yes, I understand." Yiguchin nodded slightly. Previously, Chu Qingqi had explained it to him. Naturally, he knew the significance of the exchange. If the Limitless Sword sect or the Saber-conferred King's Palace were to obtain first place again, it would be extremely disadvantageous for the Great Desolate sect. It would be extremely disadvantageous for the elders and disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda Association, and they would have to pay a huge price. As a member of the Sword Sect Pagoda Association, Yiguchin naturally had to do his part. Moreover, the news of his return had not been leaked. Therefore, Yiguchin was now a secret trump card that would have unexpected effects. However, before going to the Great Desolate Mansion, I still have somewhere to go. Yiguchin thought to himself as he found the Green Sky Eagle. Yiguchin rode the Green Sky Eagle and directly left the Sword Whisper mountain range. Before going to the Great Desolate Mansion, he still had to go to 2 places. The first place was the Sword Whisper Stele in the Beichin Mansion. Yiguchin's strength had increased again and he could enter the Heavenly Path Sword Realm in the Sword Whisper Stele to collect the Sky-Splitting Sword Soul again. The second place was the Honorable Cave Abode in the Heavenly Wasteland Plains. Yiguchin knew that this trip to the Great Desolate Mansion was extremely dangerous. Whether it was the threat from the barbarian race's holy sons and holy daughters or the 7 great factions, Yiguchin had to be vigilant. Moreover, he also had to consider entering the 5 Elements Temple to obtain the sacred elixir. Therefore, Yiguchin had to increase his strength again to have some assurance. Chapter 366. About a day later, Yiguchin arrived at the sword-seeking stele of the Beichin Mansion. The sword-seeking stele at the top of the Sky Sword Peak was still in ruins. Coming to this familiar place, Yiguchin's eyes had a touch of melancholy. He unconsciously thought of Situ Hongxue. He thought of the few days he spent with Situ Hongxue, honing their swordsmanship, hunting demonic beasts, and barbecuing. That was also a rare leisure time for Yiguchin. But now, things had changed. Situ Hongxue disappeared without a trace like a wisp of smoke. In the entire Saint Origin dynasty, there was no news about Situ Hongxue. This woman, who was once famous in the dynasty, seemed to have disappeared from the world. No one mentioned her. But when he thought of the old woman with a high realm beside Situ Hongxue, Yiguchin felt that Situ Hongxue might have left the Saint Origin dynasty and gone to the wider world of the Nantian region. I don't know if we can meet again. Yiguchin shook his head slightly and stopped thinking about it. If fate brought them together, they would meet again. If not, then forget about each other. Yiguchen activated the sequence emblem on the back of his hand and entered the heavenly law sword realm. With his current strength of the Divine Soul's 6th transformation, he absorbed another 20,000 sword souls. After absorbing 20,000 sword souls, Yiguchen felt that his body was bloated, so he stopped. Now, there are 30,000 sword souls in my body. As the number of sword souls increases, the power will be greatly enhanced. I will come back for the remaining sword souls in the future. Yiguchen did not force it. With his current strength, he could only accommodate 30,000 sword souls. After that, Yiguchen left the sword-seeking steel. After another day, Yiguchen arrived at the heavenly wasteland plain. Yiguchen always had a feeling that there was an undiscovered secret in the heavenly wasteland plain. But now, with his current strength, he could not find out anything. Therefore, Yiguchen did not think too much and went directly to the venerable cave mansion. Yiguchen saw the ancient stone forest from afar. In the sky above the stone forest, the 72-leaf reincarnation sword lotus was still spinning. Accompanied by the rotation of the sword lotus, countless sharp and fierce sword qis gushed out without rest. With this method left behind by Feng Manlu, the venerable cave mansion was extremely safe and would not be taken by outsiders. Yiguchen looked around and found that there was no one around. His figure flashed and directly entered the cave mansion. Yiguchen had been to the venerable immortal's cave twice. The first time, he broke in with the others. The second time, Yiguchen entered alone and obtained the enlightenment leaf and the blood cloud centipede. However, Yiguchen knew that the value of a venerable's cave abode could not be so little. Otherwise, Qiu Shan would not have been so eager to get Yiguchen to hand over the cave mansion. When Yiguchen entered the cave mansion last time, he also found a layer of light barrier in the depths of the cave mansion. Yiguchen could not break the light barrier with his strength at that time, so he could only give up. But now, Yiguchen's strength had skyrocketed, so he could give it a try. Soon, he arrived in front of the light barrier. Without hesitation, Yiguchen directly unleashed his strongest combat strength. He brandished the Xianming heavy sword and unleashed the Azura sword intent. He directly performed the first move of the 10,000 God tribulation, destruction of heaven and earth. The terrifying sword qi gathered at one point, as if it could destroy everything, and directly bombarded the light barrier. This kind of attack was originally very penetrating, and Yiguchen had already unleashed a powerful strength. As expected, this layer of light trembled violently, and then with a bang, it shattered into countless specks of light. After breaking this layer of light barrier, Yiguchen entered deeper into the cave mansion. After walking for about 15 minutes, Yiguchen's footsteps suddenly stopped. The reason for that was because he had discovered a figure standing there silently, emitting a cold murderous aura. Yiguchen frowned and raised his vigilance to the highest level. In the venerable cave mansion, the slightest negligence could cost one's life. Yiguchen released his spiritual perception, and to his surprise, the figure did not have a trace of life aura. Yiguchen's footsteps slowly approached. Only then did he see the figure clearly. The figure was covered in a ferocious blood-red armor. The armor was covered with ferocious thorns, as if it was made of solidified blood, and densely covered the figure's entire body. There was even a layer of armor on the figure's face, making him look like an Azura demon. At the same time, the figure was holding a blood-red longsword in his hand. The edge on one side of the sword was also serrated, like the teeth of a shark. It looked rather murderous and bloody. Whether it was the armor or the sword, there were some cracks all over it, as if it had been greatly damaged. Even so, Yiguchen could see that the armor and sword were extraordinary, and even seemed like a set of divine weapons. Just as Yiguchen walked within 100 feet of the figure in the blood-red armor seemed to have awakened. He directly waved the blood-red longsword in his hand and charged at Yiguchen. Yiguchen's expression changed slightly. The figure in the blood-red armor did not move, but once he moved, his power was monstrous. The blood-red sword light shocked Yiguchen. Boom! Inside the cave mansion, a great battle unfolded. Yiguchen burst out with all his strength. He held the Xianming heavy sword and summoned 360 golden sword veins. At the same time, he used the spirit-devouring secret technique, and his strength skyrocketed to the peak of the 9 transformations. Yiguchen, who had the ultimate sea of qi, no longer had any side effects after using the spirit-devouring secret technique. Therefore, Yiguchen could use this secret technique at will. God-slaying sword technique, Yama. Facing such a powerful figure in the blood-red armor, Yiguchen did not hold back at all, and directly burst out with his powerful sword move. The boundless blood-red figure rose from the ground behind Yiguchen, as if it was the Yama of the 9 serenities. A blood-red sword light followed Yiguchen's sword and swept out. Boom! As the dust scattered, the figure in the blood-red armor did not suffer any damage. Yiguchen's eyes suddenly flashed. He knew that it was all because of the blood-red armor. Boom! The blood-red armor figure's strength skyrocketed again, directly reaching the life and death challenge realm. Coupled with the defense of the blood-red armor and the offensive power of the blood-red longsword, Yiguchen immediately fell into a dangerous situation. No, this figure is not a living person, but a puppet. Yiguchen's gaze was like a long sword as he stared at the figure in the blood-red armor. Yiguchen could not be more familiar with this kind of explosive aura. It was almost the same as the blood cloud centipede. Without hesitation, Yiguchen directly summoned the blood cloud centipede, and almost squeezed out the last bit of energy from the demonic cloud blood crystal. The blood cloud centipede's strength also skyrocketed to the life and death challenge realm. However, it only lasted for a few dozen breaths. Yiguchen directly ordered the blood cloud centipede to restrain the figure in the blood-red armor. As for himself, he used wave-like subtle steps, leaving behind afterimages as he circled behind the figure in the blood-red armor. He knew that the blood cloud centipede's energy source was the demonic cloud blood crystal behind its head. Therefore, Yiguchen planned to use brute force to extract the demonic cloud blood crystal. Rumble. The blood cloud centipede clashed with the figure in the blood-red armor, firmly entangling it. Yiguchen, on the other hand, attacked the back of the figure's head with his sword. However, the Xianming heavy sword was not sharpened. Therefore, Yiguchen could only put it away and condense his Zhenqi into a sword. Seems like I still need a sharpened sword. Yiguchen thought to himself as he continued to attack. Finally, in the last few breaths of time when the blood cloud centipede's energy was almost exhausted, Yiguchen seized the opportunity and pried open the mechanism at the back of the figure's head. A translucent crystal with a hazy blood mist swirling around it rolled out with a grunt. The figure in the blood-red armor suddenly froze, as if it was frozen. Yiguchen's eyes brightened. The demonic cloud blood crystal had not been consumed much. Besides, Yiguchen was also somewhat interested in the blood armor and the blood-colored longsword. Chapter 367. Yiguchen had the Xianming heavy sword. However, the Xianming heavy sword was not suitable for all sword techniques. It focused on the ferocious sword momentum that could break 10,000 kilograms. However, Yiguchen's swordsmanship was not limited to just one type. Therefore, Yiguchen needed to find another sword. As for forging his own sword, Yiguchen's current ability was still a little lacking. Moreover, he had not found his innate sword embryo. Yiguchen had long thought that if he wanted to forge his own famous sword, the innate sword embryo was indispensable. With this demonic cloud blood crystal, the blood cloud centipede can finally be of use. Yiguchen pressed the demonic cloud blood crystal into the back of the blood cloud centipede's head, and then put the puppet away. He then picked up the blood-colored longsword from the blood-armored figure's hand. After observing it closely, Yiguchen realized that, although the longsword and the blood armor were full of cracks, there were even finer vein-like patterns all over them. What a strange divine weapon! Yiguchen wanted to take off the blood armor on the puppet but found that he could not. Could it be? Yiguchen thought for a moment and began to investigate carefully. Finally, he found a small array on the back of the armor. Yiguchin did not hesitate. He extracted a drop of essence blood from his body and dripped it into the array. At the same time, he also found a small array on the hilt of the blood-colored longsword. He also dripped a drop of essence blood. Suddenly, a stream of information was transmitted into Yiguchin's mind. As expected, the longsword and armor were the same as the blood cloud puppet. They were products of the Baiming family, one of the 5 overlords of the Nantian region. The blood-colored longsword was called the Blood Prison Sword. The blood-colored armor was called the Heavenly Demon General Armor. And as Yiguchin expected, they were indeed a set of divine weapons with the same attributes. These 2 divine weapons were both supreme-grade divine weapons with mystical patterns. The only supreme-grade mystical weapon that Yiguchin had seen before was Jun Xiaoyao's sword, the Heavenly Mandate. But Yiguchin felt that the quality of the Heavenly Mandate far surpassed these 2 divine weapons. However, when he remembered that Jun Xiaoyao was a genius of the Luo Fu Sword Pavilion and one of the top 10 young masters of the Nantian region, he felt relieved. Later on, Yiguchin also learned from the information that there were several spiritual pattern arrays in the Blood Prison Sword and Heavenly Demon General Armor. However, due to the damage, only one spiritual pattern array called Blood Spirit was useful. The greatest use of this formation was that it could absorb the life force of the enemy after killing them and use it to repair its own damage. Not only that, but the Blood Spirit array could also transform blood chi into true chi and feed it back to the owner, allowing them to erupt with even more power. Yiguchin looked at the vein-like patterns on the Blood Hell Sword and Heavenly Demon General Armor and suddenly understood. It could be said that the Blood Spirit magical array alone made these 2 divine weapons extraordinarily valuable. Although these 2 divine weapons were in a damaged state, as long as they killed more people and absorbed more blood chi, there would be a day when they could be repaired. When they were completely repaired, the power of supreme-grade divine weapons with spiritual patterns could be fully unleashed. Yiguchin tried to put on the Heavenly Demon General Armor. With a thought, the Heavenly Demon General Armor covered Yiguchin's body like a living thing, wrapping him up. Shoulder armor, breastplate, arm armor, greaves, and combat boots all appeared. Even Yiguchin's face was covered with a layer of blood-red armor. At this moment, Yiguchin was wearing the ferocious Heavenly Demon General Armor and holding the Blood Hell Sword. He really looked like an Asura from hell, with a murderous and cold aura. Not bad. Yiguchin was very satisfied. After putting on the Heavenly Demon General Armor, his appearance was hidden, which was also something he could take advantage of. He waved the Blood Hell Sword in his hand without using a trace of genuine chi, but the sharp blood-red sword light seemed to be about to leave the sword. Even in the forest of 10,000 swords, there won't be a second divine weapon like this other than the Xianming heavy sword. Yiguchin put away the Blood Hell Sword and Heavenly Demon General Armor. He looked around again, but he couldn't find anything else. Yiguchin went deeper into the venerable cave dwelling, and deeper in, another light curtain appeared. This light curtain was not something Yiguchin could break with his current cultivation base. It seems that the senior who left behind this cave dwelling is really cautious. He wouldn't give away the opportunity so easily, but this is also good. It will strengthen my determination to break through the life and death threshold. Yiguchin was not disappointed. Instead, he was determined. He felt that there might be traces of the sacred medicine and the enlightenment ancient tree behind this light curtain. After all, Yiguchin had already found the enlightenment leaves and branches in this cave dwelling. There was a high possibility that there was an enlightenment ancient tree inside. If he could obtain a complete enlightenment ancient tree, Yiguchin's comprehension would skyrocket again. His comprehension of various realms, sword intents, sword skills, and so on would also be faster. Therefore, Yiguchin had to explore the innermost layer in the future. After resting for a while, Yiguchin also left the venerable cave dwelling. But just as Yiguchin was about to leave the endless plains, he suddenly thought of a place. The bottomless demon abyss. Yiguchin's 5-colored golden core was obtained from a mysterious barbarian tribe corpse in the depths of the bottomless demon abyss. Yiguchin now felt that the barbarian tribe corpse's identity was definitely not ordinary. And with Yiguchen's current strength and his sea of qi, he could already guarantee that he would be able to explore the bottomless demon abyss again. Not to mention that Yiguchen's own vigorous genuine qi could block the erosion of the death qi for a long time. He also had a mysterious trump card like the Thunder Tribulation sword that could refine the death qi. Therefore, he was not afraid of the death qi in the bottomless demon abyss. Yiguchen felt that there must be a big secret inside the bottomless demon abyss. Let's go and explore first. It won't take long anyway. Yiguchen's eyes flashed. He changed direction and flew towards the bottomless demon abyss on the green sky eagle. In just 2 hours, Yiguchen was about to reach the bottomless demon abyss. He landed directly and asked the green sky eagle to wait in place. Then he approached alone. From a few miles away, Yiguchen could see the dark death qi that seemed to have covered half of the sky. It was rolling like a black curtain. The death qi in the bottomless demon abyss seemed to be even more turbulent. Yiguchen's eyes narrowed. Just as he was about to go deeper, he suddenly saw 2 figures in front of him. Their target was also the bottomless demon abyss. There's someone else. Yiguchen stopped in his tracks. The bottomless demon abyss was a famous forbidden area in the Tianhuang Plain. Almost all the warriors in the Saint Origin dynasty knew about it. Ordinary people couldn't wait to hide. Why would they come here? Yiguchen could come here because he had the ability to overcome the erosion of the death qi. However, ordinary warriors, even if they had the hidden latch of life and death and the spiritual bridge of heaven and earth, would not dare to explore. Let's wait and see. Yiguchen did not continue to move forward. He was afraid that there would be more variables. However, what made Yiguchen's expression change slightly was that the 2 figures seemed to have discovered him and flew towards him at an extremely fast speed. Yiguchen's expression did not change. He turned around and left. "Brother, please wait." A shout came from the other side. Yiguchen continued to leave as if he did not hear it. Swoosh! At this moment, a ray of light shot out from the figure in the distance. It expanded in mid-air and turned into a translucent crystal cover, enveloping Yiguchen. Yiguchen furrowed his brows. That person had taken out a divine weapon without any explanation. Wasn't that too overbearing? Yiguchen stretched out his hand and grasped the air. His true qi condensed into a golden longsword and he swung it at the crystal cover. Along with a loud explosion, Yiguchen's expression changed slightly. He found that the cover only trembled a little before it fell down and enveloped Yiguchen. "I told you not to leave." The 2 figures arrived. Yiguchen glanced at them and his eyes narrowed. Chapter 368. Not far away, a man and a woman were walking towards them. The man was about 20 years old and was wearing a luxurious purple gold robe. His face was handsome and there was a kind smile on his face. The girl was slightly younger, about 16 or 17 years old. She was also wearing a purplish gold robe, which outlined her delicate body that was in the early stages of puberty. But there was a touch of arrogance on her face. Yiguchen, who was covered by the crystal cover, stood there indifferently without any change in his expression. Because he had discovered that this crystal cover was a rare treasure. With his current strength, unless he exerted all his strength, it would be difficult to break it. But to reveal all his cards in front of strangers was obviously not a wise thing to do. "I wonder what you 2 want." Yiguchen's face was indifferent. Not to mention Yiguchen, if it had been anyone else, they would not have been happy if they had been asked to stay by others in such a way for no reason. "Hey, you really? My brother told you to stop and you kept walking. Now that you are being forced to stay, who is to blame?" The girl in the purple gold robe lifted her chin slightly, showing her arrogance without a doubt. "I don't know you. Do you think I will stop just because you tell me to?" Yiguchen raised his eyebrows, unable to understand this girl's brain circuit. Could it be that everyone in the world revolved around them? "You stinking brat, if you dare to say another word, I will teach you a lesson today." The girl in the purple gold robe took a step forward and a peak of the 9 transformations of the divine soul spread out. Yiguchen's expression did not change, but his heart was slightly surprised. At this age, the 9 transformations of the divine soul? Looking at the 7 forces, the heaven's favorites with the 9 transformations of the divine soul were at least 18 years old. There was no heaven's favorite at this age. And Yiguchen had never heard of such a heaven's favorite in the 7 forces. Ziyun, don't be too rude. The handsome man on the side pretended to scold her. But there was no hint of blame in his tone. Yiguchen's expression didn't change as he spoke. Could you remove the cover first? Seeing this, the handsome man smiled and said, Brother, I am Dongfang Hong, and this is my sister, Dongfang Ziyun. I see that you have the ability to shake the crystal cloud shield, so you must be extraordinary as well. Therefore, I have something to ask you. The man named Dongfang Hong said with a seemingly amiable smile. However, he still didn't remove the so-called crystal cloud cover. Yiguchen could also see a trace of hidden contempt in Dongfang Hong's eyes. That was right. It was the kind of disdain that one would give to a lowly being like an ant. Dongfang Hong thought that he had concealed it well, but he couldn't escape Yiguchen's eyes. I'm sorry, I've never heard of your names, nor do I know who you are. If there's nothing else, please let me go. Yiguchen frowned slightly. If he used his full strength, it would be enough to break through the crystal cloud barrier. It was just that he didn't want to reveal his trump card in front of these two. But if he was really forced, Yiguchen wouldn't care so much. TCH, you're really a frog at the bottom of a well. You've never even heard of the Dongfang family. Don't you know that the sun rises from the east? Dongfang Ziyun puffed out her small chest and looked at Yiguchen with disdain, as if she was looking at a country bumpkin. However, with their background and experience, they did have the right to look down on Yiguchen. The Dongfang family? Yiguchen's expression was calm, but his heart was rippling slightly. Because the blood cloud puppet, blood prison sword, and sky demon general armor all came from the Baiming family. The Baiming family, the Dongfang family, and the 5 overlord families of the South Horizon region. Yiguchen quickly connected the dots. Dongfang Ziyun was at the peak of the 9 transformations soul transformation at such a young age, and Dongfang Hong's strength made Yiguchen feel threatened. He must be at the life and death challenge realm. Such a young life and death challenge realm expert could only be nurtured by the big forces of the South Sky region. Yiguchen pondered in his heart. But in Dongfang Ziyun's eyes, this scene made him look like he was scared silly. She giggled and said, Big brother, look, this brat is scared silly. Ziyun, don't be rude. Although Dongfang Hong said this, there was a trace of contempt in his eyes. He paused for a moment, then said, My sister and I have always liked to travel around, looking for dangerous places and opportunities. When we passed by the Saint Origin dynasty, we heard that there was a forbidden area called the Bottomless Demon Abyss in the Heaven Wasteland Plain. We were excited and came here. As expected. Yiguchen's face was expressionless as he thought to himself. He was curious as to why people from big families of the South Sky region would come to the Saint Origin dynasty. However, Yiguchen didn't completely believe them. He knew that in the eyes of these two, he was just a lowly character in a small dynasty. Since you want to explore, then go ahead. What's the use of keeping me here? Yiguchen asked indifferently. To be honest, I'm not familiar with the Bottomless Demon Abyss, so I hope you can lead the way for us. Dongfang Hong finally revealed his purpose. Lead the way for them. Yiguchen looked at Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun. Who did they think they were to ask Yiguchen to lead the way for them? Moreover, Yiguchen knew that the so-called leading the way was just a pretense. To put it bluntly, they were using Yiguchen as a shield to explore the way for them and bear the risk. They would stay behind and act according to the circumstances, looking for opportunities. Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun's attitude must have been the same when they were traveling around dangerous places, forcing others to lead the way. In the end, the ones who died were the others, while the siblings benefited. The Dongfang family. What a great reputation. Unfortunately, I don't know this so-called Dongfang family. Yi Guqin's tone was indifferent. Oh, brother, I'm just being kind. After this is done, I can reward you with 100,000 crystal jades. How about it? Aren't you tempted by such a sum of money? Dongfang Heng's tone also turned cold. He slowly took a step forward, and a faint pressure of life and death poured out. Yi Guqin's eyes flashed. With his current wealth, 100,000 crystal jades was nothing in his eyes. Dongfang Heng must have thought that Yi Guqin was a rogue cultivator or a disciple of a small family, so he would give him 100,000 crystal jades as charity. However, Yi Guqin deliberately took 2 steps back, pretending to be intimidated by the aura. His face turned pale. He knew that disciples of large families in the South Horizon region like these definitely had many life-saving treasures. Even if he used the blood cloud puppet, it would be difficult to deal with these two in a short time. Therefore, Yi Guqin could only resort to a strategy. Seeing Yi Guqin's pale face and taking a few steps back, Dongfang Ziyun sneered, I already told you to behave yourself. You just had to make Big Brother angry. As she spoke, she looked at Dongfang Heng with admiration. As one of the dominating families in the South Horizon region, the Dongfang family produced countless geniuses. However, Dongfang Ziyun and Dongfang Heng were disciples of the Side family with low status. Among the Side family disciples, Dongfang Heng, who had reached the life and death threshold, was already in the top 3. This was why Dongfang Ziyun admired him so much. In Dongfang Ziyun's eyes, Yi Guqin didn't even have the right to carry Dongfang Heng's shoes. Therefore, Yi Guqin's indifferent attitude towards Dongfang Heng made Dongfang Ziyun very unhappy. Brother, please. Dongfang Heng still had a smile on his face as he removed the crystal cloud barrier. However, he felt a chill in his heart. He had been a Side family disciple of the Dongfang family since young and had suffered all kinds of humiliation. It wasn't until he revealed his talent and reached the life and death threshold that the Dongfang family started to pay attention to him. Therefore, Dongfang Heng was slightly sick in his heart. He couldn't bear to see others looking down on him. In this small kingdom, Dongfang Heng was confident that he could do whatever he wanted. Even if he met experts, he just had to mention the Dongfang family's name and they would all treat him politely. However, this youth in front of him treated him with such an attitude. This made Dongfang Heng's heart turn cold. However, because he still needed Yi Guqin as a spy, Dongfang Heng didn't fall out with him. When Yi Guqin slowly walked towards the bottomless demon abyss, Dongfang Heng's smile suddenly froze. He turned his head and asked Dongfang Ziyun, Ziyun, are you sure there's a great opportunity in the bottomless demon abyss? Yes, big brother, don't worry. The treasure-seeking mouse won't make a mistake. However, this treasure-seeking mouse seems to be afraid of the bottomless demon abyss, as if there's something terrifying there. Dongfang Ziyun took out a fist-sized golden mouse. This was a rare demonic beast called the treasure-seeking mouse. Only an overlord family like the Dongfang family could obtain such a rare demonic beast. It's fine. No matter how dangerous it is, with that fellow in front of us, we'll just act according to the situation. Dongfang Heng sneered. Clearly, this wasn't the first time he had done this. That's right. That stinking brat dares to talk back to Big Brother. He's really short-sighted. The ignorant are fearless. Dongfang Ziyun mocked. Chapter 369. Yi Guqin walked in front, while Dongfang Heng and Dongfang Ziyun followed behind him. Dongfang Heng was at the life and death threshold, while Dongfang Ziyun was at the pinnacle of the 9 transformations of soul. They didn't believe that Yi Guqin could escape from their control, so they weren't worried and just followed behind. Yi Guqin's face was indifferent. The appearance of the Dongfang family's genius was a wake-up call for him. Perhaps Yiguchen had already reached the top among the geniuses of the Saint Origin dynasty, and there were very few people who could compete with him. However, the Saint Origin dynasty was just a remote dynasty in the Nantian region. Whether it was the Luofu Sword Pavilion, Gu Xiaoyang's Starry Sword Pavilion, or Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Xian's Dongfang family, they were all top forces in the Nantian region. To put it bluntly, if they wanted to, any one of these forces could easily wipe out the Saint Origin dynasty. Therefore, Yiguchen didn't have the right to be complacent. However, Yiguchen had a trace of doubt in his heart. His parents and Aunt Xuansu definitely didn't come from simple backgrounds. Also, what kind of existence was Sky Mountain in the Nantian region? How did it compare to the Starry Sword Pavilion? All of these were mysteries, and only when Yiguchen stepped onto the stage of the Nantian region would he be able to find some clues. It's useless to think about these now. Let's solve this crisis first. I don't want to experience this kind of thing a second time. Yiguchen's eyes were cold. He had always been indifferent, and killing people wasn't a big deal to him. It didn't matter if you were from the Dongfang family or not. If you crossed the line in Yiguchen's heart, he wouldn't show any mercy. Yiguchen walked to the edge of the bottomless demon abyss, and the rolling death chi was even thicker than before. "Brother, please lead the way," Dongfang Hong said with a fake smile a few dozen feet behind him. Dongfang Ziyun's face was also filled with playfulness, looking at Yiguchen as if she was looking at a mouse in a cage. Yiguchen didn't say anything, and directly entered the abyss with his golden true chi wrapped around him. "Ha, I thought this kid was arrogant, but now he's so obedient. People from small places are like this, bullying the weak and fearing the strong." Dongfang Hong shook his head and laughed. He no longer concealed his disdain, and spoke with disdain. "Big brother, let's follow them. If we really find any treasures, we can't let that stinking brat take advantage of us." Dongfang Ziyun was concerned about the treasures in the bottomless abyss. Dongfang Hong and the family. The bottomless all year long. The deeper, the death chi of the abyss was, the death realm the chi was. However, Yiguchen's current strength was no longer the same as before. With his boundless sea of chi, Yiguchen's true chi would never run out. Therefore, he did not have to worry too much about the corrosion of death energy for the time being. The only thing Yiguchen was worried about was what existed in the depths of the bottomless abyss. At the same time, Yiguchen was secretly paying attention to Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun. When they entered the bottomless abyss, they were also surprised by the death chi. They couldn't help but release their true chi to protect themselves. Yiguchen secretly gauged Dongfang Hong's battle strength. As for Dongfang Ziyun, Yiguchen wouldn't have paid much attention to her if she didn't have some strange dharma treasures. Yiguchen had no fear as long as they didn't enter the life and death realm, even if they were at the peak of the 9 transformations. With his current strength, it would be difficult for him to find a match in the divine soul realm. What Yiguchen cared about the most was Dongfang Hong's strength. Although they were all at the life and death realm, there were differences in strength. Opening the Chi Si and Mind Si, allowing them to connect and fuse with the body, was the life and death realm. The initial opening of the life and death realm was called the minor realm. When the Chi Si and Mind Si were completely connected and fused, it was called the grand realm. When Gu Xiaoyang, Jun Xiaoyao, and other top geniuses of the Nantian region broke through the life and death realm, they all directly opened the grand realm. People like them were the real geniuses. Dongfang Hong's true chi was vigorous, but it was slightly unstable. It was obvious that he had just broken through the life and death realm. Even in the small hidden entrances, it wasn't very stable. It was because of this that Dongfang Hong was only slightly valued by the Dongfang family. If he could completely open the life and death realm and achieve the grand realm in one go, even the Dongfang family would treat him seriously and nurture him as a martial arts genius. However, even if it was just the minor realm, his strength was far beyond the 9 transformations. Therefore, Yiguchen didn't let his guard down. As time passed, Yiguchen and the Dongfang siblings went deeper and deeper into the bottomless abyss. 500 feet, 700 feet, 10,000 feet, the place Yiguchen went even deeper than the cave where he obtained the 5-colored golden core and the ancient jade of the 5 divine beasts. The chi of death here was extremely dense, and the corrosive power was also several times stronger. Even with Yiguchen's golden true chi, it was still making sizzling sounds. It was very exhausting. Now, Yiguchen was a little relieved. At this place, even a chi sea of 10,000 feet wouldn't be enough. Only a chi sea of 10,000 feet would be able to hold on. At the same time, he also noticed that the Dongfang siblings had already brought out 2 transparent light shields. It wasn't the crystal cloud shield that trapped Yiguchen before, but a method used to isolate the chi of death. As expected of a big force. Such a protective treasure might not be found even in the 7 big forces, Yiguchen thought to himself. Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun looked at each other in surprise. That kid's true chi is so dense. Dongfang Hong was astonished. Dongfang Ziyun's eyes lit up, and she said in a low voice, maybe that stinky kid has some secrets. After we explore this place, we can capture him and force him to tell us what secrets he's hiding. Ziyun, you're really smart, Dongfang Hong praised. I learned it from you, big brother. Dongfang Ziyun smiled with her eyes narrowed. Below the demonic abyss, Yiguchen's lips curled up in a cold smile. The range of his divine soul was 200 feet, and with the chi of death here, Yiguchen's divine soul fluctuations were even more concealed. Therefore, Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun didn't realize that their conversation had been heard by Yiguchen. You're going too far. Yiguchen's eyes were as cold as swords. Dongfang Ziyun looked delicate and beautiful, but her heart was so sinister. Moreover, she had already touched Yiguchen's bottom line. If that's the case, then I will accompany you to the end. Yiguchen suddenly let go of the hand that was holding the cliff. His body fell into the depths like an arrow. Above, Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun's expressions changed at the same time. They gritted their teeth and fell down together. 2,000 feet, 3,000 feet, 5,000 feet, in the end, Yiguchen didn't know how deep he had fallen, but he vaguely sensed the ground. He tapped the cliff again and landed steadily. As soon as his feet touched the ground, there was a series of cracking sounds. Yiguchen looked down and focused his eyes. The ground beneath his feet was covered in countless white bones. He looked at the bottom of the demonic abyss. As far as the eye could see, there were white bones everywhere. At the end of the endless white bones, a pitch-black demonic city stood there with an ancient and desolate aura. At the bottom of the demonic abyss, there was a land of white bones and an ancient demonic city. Chapter 370. The scene in front of him was shocking and frightening. The deepest part of the bottomless demon abyss seemed to have been hollowed out. Countless white bones covered the white land. On the ground, there was a dark demon city that seemed to have been standing since ancient times, with a primitive and barbaric aura. In the bottomless demon abyss, the surging deathly aura that could devour life came from the demon city. Danger. Extreme danger. Yiguchen's eyes were filled with shock. He was a cold and indifferent person, and he did not know what fear was. However, the demon city in front of him gave him a sense of extreme danger. This sense of danger surpassed all the dangers that Yiguchen had encountered before. It was as if there was a taboo in the demon city. At this moment, Yiguchen suddenly realized that the immemorial sword token in his origin ring had a reaction and started to tremble slightly. Immemorial sword token, could it be? Yiguchen's face suddenly froze and an intense light burst out from his eyes. With his personality, it was rare for him to be agitated or lose his composure. However, Yiguchen was unable to calm down. This was because he knew that the immemorial sword token was closely related to the famed immemorial swords. In the immemorial sword record, there were 108 divine swords on the heaven and earth lists. They were the strongest divine weapons in the world. Above the South Sky region, the Celestial Emperor sword, which was ranked 14th on the heaven list, had replaced the blazing sun and bright moon to illuminate the land. A sword that could illuminate the vast land showed how powerful it was. Even if it was a famed sword on the earth list, even if it was slightly weaker than the famed sword on the heaven list, it was still a rare and precious divine weapon. It could be said that the famed immemorial swords were rare. Although mysterious fires and mysterious thunders were rare, they were nothing compared to the famed immemorial swords. Their value was not on the same level. The famed immemorial swords were priceless. Although my ambition is to create a famed sword that belongs to me, I will have no regrets if I can obtain a famed immemorial sword, Yiguchin thought to himself. A famed ancient sword was the ultimate dream of all sword cultivators. Yiguchin was no exception. It could be said that if this news were to spread out, the entire South Horizon region would be in an uproar. None of the top forces would be able to sit still. Could it be that the primordial sword is in this demon city? But I only have one primordial sword token. The Situ family has 2 primordial sword tokens. The other one was taken away by Prince Yuani, Yiguchin thought to himself. Clearly, there were more than just these few immemorial sword tokens. Yiguchin only had one on him. Although there was a reaction now, it obviously wouldn't change anything. TSK, I didn't expect there to be such a magnificent demon city in the bottomless demon abyss. Dongfang Heng's voice came from behind. Dongfang Ziyun's face was also filled with shock as she looked at the shocking scene in front of her. However, she turned to look at Yiguchin and crossed her arms in front of her chest. She pouted and looked at Yiguchin playfully. "Stinking brat, you sure run fast," said Dongfang Ziyun. A dark light flashed in Yiguchin's eyes. Fortunately, the Dongfang siblings didn't have any immemorial sword tokens. Otherwise, if they sensed the strange reaction of the immemorial sword token, they would suspect that this demon city was related to the primordial sword. "Ziyun, what are you talking about? I don't think this brother wants to run away. He's in a hurry to show us the way." Dongfang Heng laughed. He was in a good mood to be able to find such a secret place. However, his words seemed to be hinting at something. Obviously, the deeper meaning was to tell Yiguchin to be honest and not play any tricks. Yiguchin didn't say anything. His expression was calm. Seeing this, Dongfang Heng directly said, "Brother, please lead the way into the city." The Eternal Devil City was filled with an aura of death. Even though it was a mysterious place, anyone who laid eyes on it would think that it was a place of great danger. Therefore, Dongfang Heng asked Yiguchin to lead the way. Yiguchin looked at Dongfang Heng deeply and didn't say anything. He slowly walked into the demon city. Dongfang Heng and Dongfang Ziyun followed behind. The closer they got to the demon city, the stronger the death qi became. Even a divine dwelling expert wouldn't be able to withstand it for too long. Even the qi shield released by Yiguchin's qi si was extremely unstable. From time to time, the death qi would corrode the shield and directly invade it. Fortunately, Yiguchin had the Thunder Tribulation sword in his body, which could eliminate the death qi. As for Dongfang Heng and Dongfang Ziyun, their protective light shield was obviously a rare treasure of the Dongfang family. Although it had dimmed a lot under the suppression of the death qi, it could still hold on for a while. Well, this is... Yiguchin suddenly looked down. Among the eerie white bones, a broken halberd was flashing. Just as he was about to reach out to examine it, a ray of qi shot directly to the ground. Yiguchin's hand paused. "Brother, wait a moment. Let me take a look at it." Dongfang Heng stepped forward with a smile and picked up the broken halberd. After taking a closer look, he instantly revealed a look of surprise. "This material is a rare treasure, golden jade." Dongfang Heng's face lit up with joy. Although the broken halberd couldn't be used, it was made of the rare golden jade, which could be melted down and reforged. Yiguchin didn't say anything and continued walking forward. A few moments later, Yiguchin found another broken weapon. "Brat, don't touch it." Dongfang Ziyun ignored Yiguchen and picked up the weapon. It's also a rare material. Dongfang Ziyun's face was filled with a happy smile. It was obvious that these weapons were left behind by experts who had died here. Therefore, none of them were ordinary. Although they were all broken, the value of the materials was extremely high. Next, Yiguchen found a few more weapons. Although Yiguchen was the first to discover these weapons, Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun stepped forward and collected them with smiles on their faces. Even in the Dongfang family, it would take a lot of wealth to obtain these rare materials. Moreover, this was only the outskirts of the Demon City. They hadn't truly entered the Demon City. In the face of the Dongfang siblings' forceful looting, Yiguchen's expression was cold and he didn't say anything. After a while, Yiguchen really did approach the Demon City. The closer he got, the more Yiguchen felt the Demon City's aura. It was like the aura of a primordial beast. Endless pitch-black death chi surged out of the Demon City. At this place, if Yiguchen didn't have the lightning tribulation sword in his body, he would have been completely devoured by the death chi in an instant. Even Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun's protective barrier dimmed and wouldn't be able to hold on for too long. But looking at the excitement in Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun's eyes, it was obvious that they wouldn't stop here. Yes, in front is. Yiguchen looked over. To his surprise, he discovered that there were many figures standing stiffly outside the Devil City. Those figures didn't have the slightest bit of vitality, and their skin was deathly gray. But the faint remnant aura made Yiguchen's face freeze. Evidently, these were all experts of the past who had ultimately fallen here. He thought of the living corpse with the 5-colored golden core. The figures in front of him were obviously devoured by the death chi like that living corpse. And Yiguchen knew that if he got too close and provoked these living corpses, they would attack him directly. Yiguchen thought to himself and stopped in his tracks. Dongfang Hong saw this and said with a smile, "Brother, why did you stop? We can't go any further." "I'm afraid it's dangerous," Yiguchen said. "Oh, I don't see any danger." Dongfang Hong's tone turned cold. "You don't see those figures?" Yiguchen frowned slightly. If those living corpses were provoked, Yiguchen and the others wouldn't be able to resist their strength. "It's just some dead corpses." "Brother, don't tell me you're afraid of that." Dongfang Hong's tone was slightly impatient. "Just go when I tell you to go. Why are you talking so much nonsense?" Dongfang Ziyun didn't hold back at all. Yiguchen's expression didn't change. He walked forward and thought of a solution. When Yiguchen was only 100 feet away from the living corpses, his soul perception vaguely sensed that some of the living corpses seemed to tremble slightly. Yiguchen's footsteps suddenly stopped, and then he rushed to the other side. The Dongfang siblings' expressions changed. Just as they were about to attack, they saw that the originally motionless living corpses woke up one by one. They let out hoarse roars and rushed toward Yiguchen and the Dongfang siblings. Chapter 371. The Dongfang siblings' expressions changed drastically when they saw the living corpses charging at them. Yiguchen had experienced this kind of thing before, so it was within his expectations. However, the Dongfang siblings were not aware of this. "Damn it! You knew about this." Dongfang Hong was so angry that he did not try to hide his anger anymore. His tone was as cold as ice. "I told you to stop, but you didn't listen. Now that the living corpses have been stirred up, who's to blame?" Yiguchen said coldly, his eyes as cold as ice. Without hesitation, he dashed toward the periphery. Putting aside the fact that there were no traces of the primordial sword in the ancient demon city, Yiguchen was not allowed to investigate in this dangerous situation. The only thing that caught Yiguchen's attention was that the primordial sword token in his origin ring was vibrating. "Do you think you can escape? You've offended the Dongfang family. Even if you were the crown prince of this dynasty, I could kill you at will, let alone a divine soul realm martial cultivator." Seeing that he had been fooled by Yiguchen, Dong Fang Hong no longer tried to hide his feelings. His tone was cold and arrogant as he judged Yi Guqin's life and death. At the same time, he and Dong Fang Ziyun retreated quickly, hoping to leave this place first. Ha! Kill! Who's the one killing who? Yi Guqin's eyes flashed. He took out the Xianming heavy sword and slashed it horizontally. A fierce thousand-layers sword wave spread out with a loud bang. With Yi Guqin as the center, the white bones on the ground were crushed into powder by the shockwave. The shockwave continued to blast toward Dong Fang Hong and the others. How dare you be so presumptuous in front of me, a mere divine soul realm martial cultivator. Dong Fang Hong threw out his palm. His terrifying genuine qi turned into a palm print and destroyed the sword wave. Then, Dong Fang Hong took out the crystal cloud shield again and tried to envelop Yi Guqin. Previously, Yi Guqin was trapped by the crystal cloud cover, so Dong Fang Hong was confident that he could trap Yi Guqin. Then, he would use Yi Guqin to stall the living corpses, allowing him and Dong Fang Ziyun to escape. Are you going to use this move again? Yi Guqin smiled coldly. He directly activated the vermilion bird totem on his chest. The power of the flame totem was directly transmitted to Yi Guqin's back. Then, a pair of incomparably gorgeous fire wings suddenly spread out. Yi Guqin flapped his wings and shot out like an arrow, dodging the crystal cloud cover. Hidden gate of life and death. Seeing the fire wings on Yi Guqin's back, Dong Fang Ziyun instinctively screamed. No, that should be some kind of secret technique. This brat really knows how to hide his strength. Dong Fang Hong's face turned slightly ugly. However, he could not let Yi Guqin leave just like that. Divine Violet Sun Palm. Dong Fang Hong's cultivation of the small mortal gate erupted. Boundless true qi surged out and turned into a giant purple hand, suppressing Yi Guqin in front of him. The Divine Violet Sun Palm was a king-level martial art of the Dongfang family. Using it with Dongfang Hong's cultivation, its power was not to be underestimated. Even Yi Guqin's expression changed slightly. That giant purple hand seemed to have the ability to lock down and suppress, slowing down Yi Guqin quite a bit. You'll die here. Dongfang Hong sneered. The true qi wings on his back unfolded. Then, he hugged Dongfang Ziyun's waist and directly overtook Yi Guqin. However, at this critical moment, he did not have the time to personally kill Yi Guqin. Roar! Behind them, more than 10 living corpses rushed over. Their aura was terrifying. One could imagine that these living corpses were supreme experts when they were alive. After they died, they were transformed into powerful demonic corpse puppets by the death qi. Yi Guqin used the Xianming heavy sword and the boundless heaven sword art to defeat the giant purple hand. However, the demonic corpse puppets had already rushed over. Yi Guqin's expression turned serious. The demonic corpse puppets from before had almost killed Yi Guqin. Now, more than 10 demonic corpse puppets were surrounding Yi Guqin. Even if Yi Guqin wanted to use the power of the lightning tribulation sword, he could not deal with more than 10 demonic corpse puppets at the same time. Big brother, that brat is finished. Not far ahead, Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun looked back and sneered when they saw Yi Guqin surrounded by the demonic corpse puppets. They did not feel the slightest bit of guilt or pity. This was what they did when they entered any secret place before. They forced the ordinary warriors to explore the way. Even if they died, they did not feel anything. It was as if those people's lives were not lives. Only the lives of the two of them were the most precious. This brat knew the situation here and pretended not to know. This is the price he has to pay, Dongfang Hong said coldly. I'm afraid this brat is already regretting it. Dongfang Ziyun giggled. On the other side, Yi Guqin, who was surrounded by the demonic corpse puppets, was facing a life and death crisis. Suddenly, an idea flashed through his mind. Without hesitation, Yi Guqin took out the pitch-black immemorial sword token from his origin ring. Yi Guqin held the immemorial sword token and stared at the demonic corpse puppets around him. The immemorial sword token was still trembling, as if it had some kind of connection with the Eternal Demon City. At this moment, a roar suddenly came from the Eternal Demon City. The roar seemed to have come from the primordial times and shook the entire land of bones. Even Yiguchin's sea of consciousness was trembling violently, as if it could not withstand the roar. After the roar, the demonic corpse puppets glanced at Yiguchen with their dead gray eyes, then turned and charged toward Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun. This scene made Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun, who were watching from a distance, turn pale instantly. It was as if they had seen a ghost. How is this possible? Dongfang Hong shouted, his face pale. He had thought that Yiguchen would be killed by the demonic corpse puppets, but now that Yiguchen was fine, the demonic corpse puppets were chasing after them. Damn it, this brat must have been here. The token in his hand must be some kind of token. He has been playing with us. Dongfang Ziyun's face was red with anger, her chest heaving up and down. In their eyes, Yiguchen obviously knew the situation here, but he pretended not to know and framed them. However, Yiguchen had never taken the initiative to frame the Dongfang siblings. They had gone too far and touched Yiguchen's bottom line. But now, the situation had reversed. Let's go. Dongfang Hong hugged Dongfang Ziyun and desperately wanted to escape. He knew that although he had the cultivation of the minor profound martial realm, he wouldn't be able to last more than a few rounds against the demonic corpse puppets. You want to leave now? Yiguchen's lips curled into a playful smile. The Dongfang siblings had repeatedly touched his bottom line, and had even secretly decided to force out his secrets. How could Yiguchen let such people go? In the next moment, Yiguchen took out the blood prison sword and heavenly demon general armor. The blood-red armor wrapped Yiguchen's body tightly, and the malevolent thorns that extended out made Yiguchen's figure appear even colder and more austere. He held the blood prison sword in his hand and flapped the vermilion bird wings on his back as he charged toward the Dongfang siblings. Not far away, Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun felt Yiguchen's change and turned back to look. Their eyes instantly froze. Damn it, you're actually from the Baiming family. Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun's eyes were filled with shock as they roared. Chapter 372. The Blood Prison Sword and Sky Demon General Armor were both products of the Baiming family. The Dongfang family and the Baiming family had a feud. As the saying went, know thyself and know thy enemy. Both families had a good understanding of their opponents. That was why Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun could recognize Yiguchen's blood prison sword and Sky Demon General armor at a glance. Damn it, no wonder you're so vicious and set us up. Even in the Baiming family, only the core members of the family can obtain the blood prison sword and Sky Demon General armor. Who are you? Dongfang Hong roared as he ran for his life. If he had faced Yiguchen alone, he would not have run. He would have even killed Yiguchen along the way to obtain the family's merits. Yiguchen must be a core member of the Baiming family who possessed these two divine weapons. He must have a high status. If he could kill such a member of the family, it would be a great contribution. Even the direct descendants of the family would look at Dongfang Hong differently because of this. But with more than 10 demonic corpse puppets chasing after him, Dongfang Hong had no chance at all. I don't believe that the Baiming family will stay here forever. Once I escape, I'll wait outside and kill this person. Dongfang Hong thought to himself as he exchanged glances with Dongfang Ziyun. The two of them understood each other and had a tacit understanding. Yiguchen, who was behind them, did not know about this. However, from Dongfang Hong's furious tone, he could guess that the Dongfang family and the Baiming family, these two hegemonic families, seemed to be in a hostile relationship. Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun clearly misunderstood him and thought that Yiguchen was a member of the Baiming family. They also thought that everything before them was Yiguchen's scheme against them. But Yiguchen did not care about this. Whether or not they misunderstood, this enmity had already been formed and there was no way to resolve it. I have to make them stay. Yi Guqian's eyes were cold. He poured his true qi into the blood prison sword. In a split second, the originally cracked and dim blood prison sword exploded with a sharp sword light that sent chills down one's spine. God-slaying sword technique, Yellow Springs. Yi Guqian slashed out with his sword, and a terrifying sword qi transformed into a blood-red sword river that surged toward the Dongfang siblings. His sword wasn't meant to kill the Dongfang siblings. After all, Dongfang Hong was in the minor profound martial realm, so it wouldn't be easy for him to kill him. What Yi Guqian wanted was to block the attack. Delay Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun, then let the demonic corpse puppets kill them. This is the God-slaying sword technique. The Baiming clan is indeed treacherous. Dongfang Hongjian sensed the sword river coming from behind him. He turned around and struck out with his palm, destroying the sword river. Originally, they had misunderstood Yi Guqian, but after Yi Guqian displayed the god-killing sword technique, they were even more convinced of Yi Guqian's identity. This was because the god-slaying sword technique was the king-level sword technique of the Baiming family. However, although Dongfang Hong blocked Yi Guqian's sword with his palm, his speed was slowed down a little. The demonic corpse puppet behind him was almost catching up with him. However, Yi Guqian's expression was indifferent as he continued to attack. He also realized that the blood prison sword had a slight effect on the god-slaying sword technique. But when he thought about the possibility that the god-slaying sword technique was also a sword technique of the Baiming clan, Yi Guqian felt relieved. Damn it! Dongfang Hong's face was ashen, and he was so angry that his heart was about to explode. Originally, with his cultivation and strength, he didn't need to expend much effort to deal with Yi Guqian. But in this situation, he could only passively defend. He didn't dare to stop to deal with Yi Guqian. Damn it, when I escape, I'll cut you into 1,000 pieces. Dongfang Hong was furious. Dongfang Hong could only watch as Yi Guqian attacked him without being able to retaliate. This made him feel extremely aggrieved. It was as disgusting as eating a fly. Ha! You didn't care about my life at all before. Now that your own life is threatened, you're flustered and exasperated. Yi Guqian's voice was as cold as water. The sea of qi in his body expanded, and his true qi surged into the blood prison sword. Yi Guqian activated the blood spirit array and displayed the fifth form of the god-slaying sword technique, Yama. Boom! The blood-red figure of Yama rose from behind Yi Guqian, and a terrifying murderous aura surged out. Ah! You actually mastered the fifth form of the god-slaying sword technique. Do you know that move? Dongfang Hong's eyes suddenly showed a trace of fear. There were many king-level sword principles in the Baiming family. 2 of them could be used in combination. The power of the combined sword technique was comparable to an emperor-level sword technique. The god-slaying sword technique was one of the 2 sword techniques that could be combined. The requirement was that one had to at least master the 5th form. That was why Dongfang Hong was so shocked when he saw Yi Guqian display Yama. If Yi Guqian had really displayed the emperor-level sword technique, even with Dongfang Hong's cultivation, he might have been seriously injured or even killed. What is he saying? Yi Guqian frowned slightly. He was not a member of the Baiming clan, so he naturally did not know the reason. However, Yi Guqian was very smart. From Dongfang Hong's words, he could tell that the god-slaying sword technique seemed to be hiding some secrets. However, at this juncture, Yi Guqian did not have the luxury of time to think too much. He directly attacked with his sword. With the enhancement of the blood spirit array, the sword was extremely powerful. The terrifying blood-red sword radiance, which was dozens of feet long, slashed toward Dongfang Hong as if it could split the sky. Dongfang Hong's expression changed abruptly. He immediately took out a life-saving treasure to block Yi Guqian's powerful sword. This was because he did not have the time to block Yi Guqian's sword. Then, Yi Guqian continued to attack with his sword. In order to escape, Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun could only take out their treasures to block Yi Guqian's attacks. Dongfang Hong's face was as black as the bottom of a pot, and the veins on his temples were throbbing. Dongfang Ziyun's face was even more ghastly. She cried, "Brother, I almost lost all my treasures." The Dongfang siblings were extremely angry. Although the materials they had taken from Yiguchen were precious, they could not compare to the treasures they had just taken out. This time, they had suffered a double loss. Roar! Behind them, the demonic corpse puppet finally caught up. It threw out a punch, and the fierce fist wind almost tore the space apart as it charged toward the Dongfang siblings. Boom! Dongfang Hong once again took out his last life-saving treasure. His origin ring was now empty. He had already thrown out most of his life-saving treasures. However, they were almost at the cliff. As long as they climbed up, they would be able to shake off the demonic corpse puppet's attacks. We're finally about to escape. When the time comes, I'll definitely contact my clansmen and have you, a member of the Dark North clan, executed. Dongfang Hong's tone was filled with hatred. Behind them, Yiguchen's expression was as cold as ice. His energy sea spun rapidly. Terrifying sword chi gushed out from his back, transforming into a pair of sword wings that were dozens of feet long. 10,000 God tribulation, destruction of heaven and earth. Yiguchen slashed out with his sword. Violent sword chi surged like a river for thousands of miles. The majestic sword chi instantly condensed into a point and shot toward Dongfang Hong and Dongfang Ziyun. No! Dongfang Hong's eyes finally revealed a look of terror. Even Dongfang Hong, who was born in the Dongfang family, was extremely shocked in the face of a supreme sword technique like the 10,000 God tribulation. He had already taken out all his life-saving treasures. If he did not attack, he would be hit by the sword. If he attacked, he would be delayed and surrounded by the demonic corpse puppets. Either way, he would be dead. In the next moment, Dongfang Hong's gaze suddenly fell on Dongfang Ziyun. Just as he was struggling with a decision, Dongfang Ziyun gritted her teeth. Dongfang Ziyun suddenly gritted her teeth. Vigorous true chi poured into her white jade-like palm and fiercely slapped towards Dongfang Hong's chest. Sorry, brother. Dongfang Ziyun's eyes were cold. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.